everybody should like this chapter. Everybody should like chapter 8 because this is the part of agency that gets you paid. Remember how we talked about in chapter 7, you couldn't actually get paid to be a real estate broker or real estate agent in a transaction unless you have a written agency agreement. How many of you remember that? That was like a fact we learned in chapter 7, right? Well, this chapter, chapter 8, is all about those written agreements. It's all about the documents, the contracts that we use. And that's the other thing that I think throws people for a loop in this class is that we say, a lot of times we say the contract. Well, the truth is there's not the contract in our business. There's lots of different contracts going on all the time because different people need to make promises to each other. But the contracts that we're going to focus on right now are the contracts between clients and the firms that those clients have hired. And Candace has got the right idea. She is ready to get paid. Me too. And when it's time to get paid, we better have an agreement in place, a written agreement in place. And that's what this chapter is all about. So I'm going to go ahead and share the slides here with you and we will get going. This chapter is called Agency Contracts. And, you know, if you really want to think about this chapter in the way it was intended and not even in a cynical way, honestly, I mean, this chapter could be called How to Get Paid. Because without the things we're going to talk about in this chapter, we don't get paid. It's not going to happen. There is no payment of commissions without some type of a written agreement. And remember, in any given transaction, so this is where I have to remind you to step up again and apply what you know. It's very hard to continually apply what you know. I'll give you an example. And I shared the email with Seth. And I said, God, I'm such a jerk sometimes, but I'm really trying to teach him. Mm-hmm. I had a student who's in a different class than this class. And it wouldn't matter if it was this class, I'd probably still share it. Because I don't think it's embarrassing for the student, but I'll share with you how I answered it. The student asked a personal question, said she bought a house some time ago, and they just found out that there was mold growing from somewhere in the crawl space and coming through to the kitchen cabinet. My guess is it could be going either way. If it's the kitchen cabinet, there's water there as well. The mold could have started top side and be working its way down just as easily as it could bottom side and be working its way up. But she said that there was mold coming from the crawl space through to their kitchen cabinet. And now I'm quoting her email here. Now, I don't want you to say I'm advocating or saying this is right. This is, you tell me what's wrong about what was said in this email. I remember you saying from class that the seller had to disclose if there was mold in their property. Let's stop right there and hold the presses. Did Travis ever say in class that a seller has to disclose if there's mold in their property?
No.
No. In fact, I'm pretty sure Travis has made a very vivid point of saying that sellers are never under any obligation to disclose anything about their property in North Carolina. Haven't we talked about that before?
Yep.
Mm-hmm, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because sellers are protected by what law? By what idea?
Caveat.
Caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware, right? Now, what she is remembering from class, I'm sure, is that somebody has a requirement to disclose mold, like any other potential, and it's not just mold, not just because it's mold, any potential issue about a property. Who would have had an obligation to disclose that kind of potential issue about that property when it was purchased, when it was marketed?
The realtor.
The listing and buying broker.
Any real estate licensees involved with the transaction, whether that be the buyer's agent or listing agent, right, could be the ones that potentially have, and that we have to use words like potentially have the responsibility to disclose, because as is being pointed out there by Kate in the chat, there's not an absolute requirement to disclose even for agents, correct?
That's correct.
And this is really important because this is exactly the kind of stuff they test you on about disclosure rules.
Yeah.
What is the requirement for the agents to disclose in the transaction?
Everything they're aware of.
And should be
Should
aware
know
of.
or reasonably have known.
Anything they are aware of, that's one group of things, or anything they what?
Have not.
Should be aware of.
Should be aware.
They're not aware of, but they
Be aware of.
should
Be aware of.
Now, so let's go back now to her real world personal question. Is it probably going to be difficult for her to show that the real estate agents involved in the transaction absolutely had knowledge of mold in the property, considering she's now lived in it for months and she just noticed it?
Is it going to be difficult?
It's
Yes.
going to be very exceptionally difficult to show that they actually had knowledge. So I think you can almost forget that one. I mean, unless you find like a smoking gun hidden email somewhere where, you know, the listing agent emailed the sellers and said, put some paint over that before they see it. You're not going to,
Some kills.
you're just not going to prove that they had actual knowledge. So what you're relying on is, should they have knowledge? And so here's what the remainder of what she said in her email. We had a home inspector look at it, and even he didn't find it. And I'm so mad at him because it says in his contract he's not responsible for if he misses things like mold. So now I'm going to pose a question back to you all. If a home inspector who was hired to find problems with the property did not notice a mold issue and make a note of it on a home inspection, if it took months after closing for the buyer who lives in the house 24 hours a day to notice a mold issue, do you think it's reasonable to hold the either listing agent or buyer's agent to some level of responsibility for not disclosing this mold? Or is that probably one of those things that we put in that category of, it was impossible for them to know this was an issue?
Impossible.
It was impossible for them to know this issue.
Impossible.
And I realize people can have a difference of opinion because these are gray areas, but I think that falls into, it's impossible for them to have known.
Yeah.
How would they have known if an inspector who crawled around in a crawl space for 2 hours couldn't see it? If there was no visible signs of it, and we have to assume there were no visible signs of it because the inspector would have seen it. If there were visible signs of it on the interior, the buyer would have presumably seen it in the months between the time they purchased and now. But that's, of course, not the answer she wanted to hear. What she wanted me to say was, well, yeah, you should sue them and you should go get some money. I can't give that answer in that case. And I'm not even saying that in a diminishing way. I don't want to diminish somebody's feelings. I get it. It's frustrating to find out you have this problem after you purchase. Here's why I share that with you. That's the kind of thing you're going to have to do on the test. You can't have this absolute approach of, yeah, they're your fault. It's not, it doesn't work that way. It's very much about taking in the whole picture. Does that help give you some insight about how material facts work? Mm-hmm. Right? You know,
Travis, real quick on that. When I was first starting to take pre-licensing, when I was like, I think I was like fresh, like out of high school, probably 18. I didn't know a lot about houses and material facts and stuff like that. So it was really hard for me to differentiate between what was for a broker and what wasn't. So this is important though.
And I think that is super important to note while we're talking about it in class, but I think that's even more reason why I think in this business, what you see is almost the opposite of what needs to happen. The people who have the ability to find material facts on their own are almost always the ones who are going the extra mile and paying somebody else to do it for them. The people who need the most help finding stuff like that, i.e. you people that are brand new, that aren't used to looking for those problems, are the ones who don't hire somebody to do it for them. And unfortunately, they make that decision based on one motivating factor. And I'm not diminishing the importance of this motivating factor. Why do you think new agents don't hire inspectors to go inspect their listings before they put them on the market?
They don't know to?
Oh, even if they know to.
They don't want to pay.
They should do it.
They don't have
want
money.
what?
They don't want to pay.
They don't want to pay for it. I'm telling you, folks, that's the easiest way to end your career before it ever gets started.
Gotta invest.
Because if you go to the real estate commission and your defense is, I'm new, I didn't know better, you're going to say, then that's exactly why you should have hired somebody to help you. Right? You know, I do know better. You know why I hire people at this point in time? Number one, I don't want to take the liability of not doing it. Number two, I don't want to waste my time with investigating the property myself. I'd rather pay somebody else to do it and work on more productive things for me. But
I was surprised when I found out that you did that before your listings.
yeah, I do. And it takes so much stress off of me, for sure.
Has the seller ever said, don't do it?
I have had sellers that were reluctant to do it. And what I've told them, Cherry, what I've explained to them is, listen, this is about liability. This is an insurance policy for me and by extension for you, the seller. And this is the toughest distinction for people to understand in the class. Does the seller have to disclose anything about their property? They do not. But are the sellers potentially liable if I don't disclose things about their property?
They are.
They are.
Yes.
Because any mistake I make, they share the burden of that mistake. And so what I explain to them is, if I make a mistake and don't disclose something, it's not going to be just me that the buyers sue. It's going to be you as well. So I'm protecting us both by doing this inspection. That usually just puts the whole thing on ice and we move on.
Once you disclose that though, and they see that there's problems, do they ever just say, well, I'm not going to fix that. I don't care.
Yeah, well, some of them do. Some of them say, yeah, we're not going to address that. Just disclose it and move on. And that's fine. They have that choice. A lot of the things that we find on the inspection reports, we do correct so that that issue's not there. But we kind of come up with a punch list of things and say, okay, these things are easy. Let's just knock these out before we ever put it on the market. And then these other things, we're just going to leave them as they are, make the buyer aware, and then the buyer can decide how important that is for them.
Travis, who pays for the inspection? I mean, yeah.
Me.
Oh,
I'm
the
the one
agent.
who wants it. I'm the one whose job it is to disclose. But now, Sharon, that's a relative question. Who pays for anything? Ultimately, who's paying for it?
Seller.
The seller is.
Seller.
They're ultimately paying me a commission. See, you've also got to have a bigger picture outlook on money with this thing. You're not paying for anything. You're not paying for marketing. You're not paying for pictures. You're not paying. The seller is paying for all of that. Factor those costs into what you charge. Stop nickel and diming people. They hate it. Then now that's not on the test. You can nickel and dime people all you want to, but I will tell you that is a quick way to alienate people in this business. Sellers hate nothing more than to say to them, "Oh, I have this. Oh, I'm only charging you 5% to sell your house. Oh, but we have a $399 documentation fee. Oh, and we charged you $150 to keep your records forever in our digital storage. Oh, and we do." They want to slap you. Factor it all in. When you say you're going to charge somebody something, that should all be built into what you're going to charge. So figure out whatever level of service you're going to offer. And that's why we have to have these contracts so that you can tell the seller or tell the buyer, this is my fee. This is how much we charge. Yeah, I may pay for it up front, but ultimately, when I get a $15,000 commission, do I think that's really supposed to be all straight in my pocket? No, some of it was the cost of doing business to get us to that point. Okay. All right.
Good way to put
So,
it.
I'm sorry.
I was just saying that's a good way to put it. I never thought about it that way.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's ultimately, what I'm going to pay out is going to be dwarfed by what I bring in. And so I look at it as a cost of doing business. Now that we've kind of talked about the setup for why these contracts are important, let's talk about the most important one of these contracts, the listing agreement. Why do you think I say the listing agreement is the most important one? Why do I always crap on buyers? I really don't mean to, but from the perspective of this class, it always feels like I do. Why do I say listing agreements are more important than buyer agency agreements? Think about that history lesson where we talked about, kind of like where the business had come from over the years. Who did everybody traditionally represent in the transaction?
Seller.
Seller. So the very basis of our business was being hired by sellers, not by buyers. Does that make sense for everybody? That's where the whole thing started, being hired by a seller to sell their property. And so the very essence of our business has always been the listing agreement. Remember the two sides of the transaction. If you think about the two sides, what are they called? Over here on the seller side, we call it the listing side of the transaction. And over on the buyer side of things, we call it the what?
Selling.
Selling side of the transaction. And that's why the agreement that a seller signs is called a listing agreement. Now, ideally, it's not always the case. At least it doesn't have to be. But ideally, the seller is only going to sign one listing agreement. What word did we say was really important when we start talking about only one in this business? What E word is really important there? Exclusive. We want exclusive listing agreements, if at all possible. Now, a couple of things to remember about listing agreements. You know how we talk sometimes about oral buyer agencies? As a matter of fact, Kate emailed me a question about oral buyer agency yesterday, I think it was. But you all remember how we talked about oral buyer agency, how buyer agency could start as an oral arrangement and stay that way for a certain period of time. Do you remember how long it could stay oral, that you were representing the buyer, but then you had to put it in writing at a certain point? Does anybody remember what that certain point is?
Before an offer is made.
Before you present an offer on behalf of your buyer client, right? You have to put that agreement into writing. Good. Listings don't work that way. When you represent the seller, you represent the seller only if you have a written agreement. In other words, you can't say you represent the seller. You can't act like you represent the seller. Can you go put a sign in the ground before you have a written agreement in place?
No.
Even if you just got off the phone with the seller and they said, hey, we want you to sell our house. Can you get it on the market as quick as possible? We need to get it going. Can you run over there and put a sign in the ground this afternoon?
No.
No, not until you have a written agreement in place. It's different on the seller side. You have to have. Another important thing to remember is this word contract is important. It is a contract. I know we like to think of it as the seller is our employer and we're their employee. It doesn't work that way. This contract is a promise between the seller and who? Who is the seller promising to work with? The one agent who is standing in front of them and going to have
The firm.
If it's a contract, can the firm fire the seller? If the firm decides they don't like the seller, can they just say, no, we're not representing you anymore?
Yep.
You think so?
Not on the
No.
contract.
Not on the
No.
contract.
They can't. They gotta
They
wait.
both agree.
It wouldn't be much of a contract if that was the case.
Right.
Can the seller decide they don't like these people who are selling their house anymore and fire them?
Nope.
They can, but they
No.
will have to pay me on the contract.
But
Well-
why not, Travis? I mean, like, technically it can resolve if you want it to, if both parties agree, right?
But that's different. That's different than firing, right? Rachel's question is, can they resolve it? Absolutely. Like with any contract, you can always have an agreement to terminate. The two parties could come to some mutual agreement. They could decide they don't like working with each other and say, you know what, it's best for, and this is mostly what happens. When you hear people say, oh, I fired my firm, they weren't doing a good job. Really what they mean was they called and they griped, I almost said another word, the broker in charge. And the broker in charge decided it was in everybody's best interest to let them go. Does that make sense for everybody? But that's both parties deciding they want out of the agreement. That's not one go, because let me tell you what would happen. Here's what you
Breach
have
of
to think.
contract.
If it wasn't a contract, every seller would fire us the day before closing
Yeah.
so that they didn't have to
That's
what?
true.
Pay the
to
commission.
So they didn't have to pay the commission even after we had done our job. It would be, I mean, we'd be broke. Not everyone, but a lot of them would.
Broke or in jail.
So it is important to understand that these really are contracts. Here's the great thing about these contracts. If you get the right kind of one in place, it doesn't matter what they do. They owe you a commission. You get the right kind of agreement in place, they tell you, take your sign down. Kip, first of all, let me ask this question. Let me get this out of the way. Can I force someone to sell their house? In other words, if I bring them an offer, I don't even care if it's a full price, double full price, cash, and would give you a diamond ring bonus. Do they have to accept that offer?
No.
No.
No, I can't force them to accept any offer, but I can force them to pay my commission. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
The whole point of a listing agreement is to outline the terms under which we are owed compensation. How many sellers do you think would be shocked to know that if their mama decided to buy their house from them, they probably would still owe a commission to their real estate firm? How many sellers do you think would be real shocked to find that out?
A lot.
A lot of them. And they almost always do. Because most listing agreements say, we don't care where the buyer comes from. If you want to do our job for us and you want to go sell it yourself to some friend or family member of yours, that's more power to you, but you still will what?
Commission.
Will pay us. Matter of fact, I have an acquaintance in the business, and when I tell you she is ice water in her veins, I'm gonna tell you, she don't play. She had a seller one time a couple years ago. We were having this discussion in class, in a CE class, and she's the one to volunteer. She just don't care, you know. She's tough. She's good, tough. She said, "Oh yeah, I had one a couple years ago, and it came to my attention that they were. I had an open house, and buyers came and were real interested in the property. And all of a sudden, they wouldn't return my phone calls. The buyers who came to the open house, and they loved it. I mean, it looked like for everything, they wanted to make an offer. And then all of a sudden, they wouldn't return my phone calls. She said it came to my attention that the seller had met them. That the buyer had showed up after the open house. After I left, they came back. And the sellers were pulling in the driveway, and they met each other, and they struck up a discussion. And so they had been having this discussion back and forth with each other about the buyer buying the property. And other people in the class, when she was telling this story, were like, oh, I would call my client and tell them, it ain't gonna work that way, honey. She said, I said, so what'd you do? She said, not a thing. I don't worry about that. And she said, I said, did the conversation continue? She said, oh yeah, they worked out a whole deal. Yeah, they negotiated contract price, and of course their conversation between them probably consisted of, if you buy it directly from me and you don't go through that real estate agent that I hired, I don't have to pay a commission, so I can give you a better deal on the property. I'm sure that was part. Do y'all think that was probably part of the discussion?
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure, more than likely.
I said, did you tell your sellers that was inappropriate? She said, no. I mean, they knew it was inappropriate. I mean, I had told them before that if any buyers had any questions, they should come to me because that was my job and that's what they were paying me for. I said, so what'd you do? She said, I didn't do anything. She said, they called me one day and said, you can come get your sign. And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, really? And I said, yeah, we actually sold it to a really good friend of ours. Of course, they lied and said we sold it to a really good friend of ours. And she said, congratulations! I'm so happy for you all. Where should I send my invoice for my commission? Well, no, you didn't sell it. She said, oh, but I didn't have to. You see, my agreement was that you hired me to help you find a buyer, but that you would pay me whether I found it or whether you found it. I mean, I assume if you found them and you did all the work and you didn't need me, you would have called me if you needed me, but you didn't, and that's okay. But you still owe me. Ice water.
Love it.
That contract.
The contract is a
Read the
contract.
contract.
Yeah.
That listing agreement says you pay me.
I have a question.
Yes.
Would this be considered a bonding contract since it's a promise to pay versus nothing's really exchanged? Would it be considered a bonding contract or no?
Absolutely. A promise to pay is what makes it a binding contract.
Okay. Well, that helps me lock it in a little bit better, knowing bonding that, you're locked in unless somebody frees each other.
Both parties have to agree. That's exactly right. And they don't. And it is does that help y'all understand why a listing agreement is so important?
Yes.
Because what it does is it establishes the right to claim I'm owed this money. Our firm, our office is owed this money. Okay. And so I tell you those kinds of things because I think it helps you in a real world understand why this is important, why it's important to talk about a listing agreement, what it sets up for. Okay. Now, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Travis. A quick scenario. What if the seller decided they don't want to sell anymore?
So if the seller decides they don't want to sell anymore and they essentially want to remove the property from the market, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I want to take it one step further after you answer that question.
Okay. Well, obviously a seller can always change their mind and decide they no longer want to sell the property. Under most listing agreements, though, they would owe a commission to the listing firm because they would not have provided the listing firm with the opportunity to do the job that the listing firm was hired to do. And the listing firm could make the argument, we did everything we were supposed to do in good faith. We spent money on marketing. We spent money on measuring the house. We spent money on, inspecting the property. We put it on the market and you never gave us, you said you were going to give us 6 months to sell it or whatever that time period was in the listing agreement. And now you haven't given us that time. So you've breached our agreement and therefore you owe us compensation. Now, I'm not saying every listing firm would. Most would not make that argument because they don't want that. There's a political, reality to, you don't want to be, going after people for commissions all the time. You don't want that to be your reputation. Okay. But legally, they could go after that commission.
Okay, and the reason I asked this is, well, my mind is working a little bit. The scenarios that can happen, I guess. If they take it off the market trying to be dirty because they probably found a buyer and that they wish to sell behind our back once we took it off the market.
Yeah.
And assuming the firm don't have anything in their agreement to get payment in case the seller decide not to sell the house, is there any legal something legal that I can pursue?
You
if
mean
I find out they
individually or as a firm?
I'm sorry?
You mean individually or
No,
as
no,
a
no. The firm. If there's something
So
legal.
if they end up selling it to someone else, so you don't go after them for commission when they pull it off the market, but you find out they actually sold it to somebody else?
Correct.
Yes, you could file a lawsuit against them after the fact. What I would recommend is you send them an invoice and say, oh yeah, I see you did sell your property. According to our listing agreement, that means you owe us compensation. Here's your invoice. And then when you don't hear back from them, file the lawsuit. And you would win the lawsuit. And it would be a slam dunk. And it's easy. See, the thing is, people can't hide that they sold the property because that's going to be a public record.
Mhm.
When that new deed gets recorded, it's there for everybody to see.
So, Travis, how long do they have to wait? Like he was saying, we have a contract and you break the contract, you don't want to sell the house. And then maybe a year and a half later, you decide to sell the house. Does the firm still have the option to request?
No, because every agency agreement it's a great question, is going to have, Charlene, an expiration. And so the firm would only be owed compensation for things that happened during the time frame of that firm's agreement. So, I'm presuming their listing agreement wouldn't have covered a year and a half later. So, I mean, you're only talking about things that occurred during the time frame that's specified on the listing agreement. Okay.
We had a house that we were going to sell in Mississippi. Of course, everything's about Mississippi. And so we listed it. And then 2 days later, we decided we didn't want to sell it. We wanted to lease it. So nothing really had happened. It had, we just signed it. And I went to the agent. I was like, and she's a pit bull. I mean, she's one of the toughest she's brutal. And I was like, we've decided we're going to lease it instead. And she's like, okay, you owe me $500. I'm like, for what? She's like, you owe me $500. And I was like, well, we just listed this like 2 days ago. She's like, but if you don't pay me, I'll sue you. We were like, here's your check. Thank you. And we moved on because we knew she meant it.
Yeah, I mean, the agreement, now, whether people actually enforce those agreements or not, they're there. They're there. So now I want to also, before we go any further, I'm kind of setting you up for the knowledge that is to come. What I try to do is anticipate where people have had problems and in the past and try to avoid those by setting up a better foundation in the beginning. One of the things that becomes really confusing in this chapter for people is how commissions get paid and how they get shared and so I want to try to show you what the traditional method of compensation is in two side-by-side transactions. And we're going to say it's the same seller. We'll say it's 123 Main Street. Okay. But two transactions, one in which the buyer is represented by an outside firm and one in which they are not. So in each case, the seller has hired Trav Talks Real Estate. Okay? Each case. Okay? And we're going to say that in each case, this seller has agreed that they're going to compensate Trav Talks with 6% of the total sales price. Pretty straightforward. If Trav Talks finds a buyer during the term of their listing agreement, they'll be compensated with 6% of the sales price of the property. Now, in a traditional transaction, what would happen is that the buyer would come in here as an unrepresented person. The buyer would have no representation. And so Trav Talks keeps all of that 6%. And that's where it ends. Everybody okay on that? That's the more traditional, old-fashioned, direct real estate model. This is what happens in co-brokered transactions. In a co-brokered transaction, what you have to do is split that into two pieces. Or we could think of it this way. That commission is actually going in two different directions. Even though the seller has agreed to compensate Trav Talks with 6%, Trav Talks has offered to pay firms representing the buyer. And so in this one, the buyer is repped by HPW. So what you end up with is a little piece of the commission that goes to Trav Talks and a piece of the commission that goes to HPW. The reality is still, who is the seller compensating?
Trav Talks.
Trav Talks.
Listing.
The seller's never paying HPW directly. Does that make sense for everybody? And the reason the seller's never paying HPW directly is HPW doesn't work for the seller. The seller doesn't have any agreement with HPW. What's happening here is the seller's handing Trav Talk 6% and saying, I agreed to pay you 6%, and you do with it whatever you want to. Well, in this case, Trav Talks promised somebody else that they would share with them. And so let's say they promised HPW that they would give them 2.5% of the total sales price for bringing them that buyer. Everybody with me so far? Well, here's the thing. Can Trav Talks go back to the seller and say, hey, seller, you need to give me an extra 2.5% because I got help finding a buyer? What would the seller say to you if you went to them and said, I couldn't do my job by myself?
That's on
So
you.
I had to get somebody else to help, and I had to pay them, so I want you to give me more money. What would the seller say to you?
Kick
Go
rock.
jump in the
Use
lake.
the money I gave you.
You're crazy. You pay them out of the money I gave you. I don't care if you couldn't do your job by yourself. That's for you to figure out. Does that very logically make sense to you all?
Yes.
That is exactly how commissions work in a co-brokered transaction. So that 2.5 isn't in addition to the 6. It comes what?
Out of the six.
From his
Out of the 6, which means Trav Talks is only going to keep 3.5% of the sales price. Does that make sense?
yes.
Because these two pieces right here have to add up to that
60%.
total. And by the way, if you really want to look at the further reality, go back. If you want to look at the further reality of a transaction like that, I'll have to redraw it. If you want to look at the further reality of that kind of a transaction, they hire Trav Talks, and then Trav Talks agrees that they're going to split it if they need help selling the property. So let me get my numbers back in here. They agreed they would pay 6% here, and we said that Trav Talks agreed they would pay 2.5% to anybody who brought them a buyer, which means Trav Talks gets to keep the 3.5% over here.
Just to differentiate for terms for the test, 2.5%, could it also be worded as a cooperating firm?
Yeah, absolutely, that's what they are. HPW in this case is a cooperating firm. If we wanted to put other labels on them, Trav Talks is called the listing firm. What would HPW be called?
The selling firm.
Selling.
The selling firm,
Buyers.
right? Because they brought us who?
The buyer.
Buyer. The selling firm brings the buyer. Now, if you wanted to look at the reality of this thing, is that where the money's going to stop getting split up in real life?
No.
No, because Seth was the listing agent for Trav Talks. Is there probably going to be another split here?
The firm.
The firm takes its piece of the pie and Seth gets the remainder of that. Right? And on the other side, it's probably going to get diced up again in the same way with the firm
And the agent.
and the agent.
It could be a referral fee somewhere in there too, man.
There could be a referral fee in here somewhere too, taking another chunk out of this thing. By the way, does the seller give a crap about any of this?
No.
No, because no matter what, the seller is always only on the hook for whatever they agreed to pay in that original listing agreement. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
And that's why the listing agreement is so important. That right there is why the listing agreement is so important, because it's going to outline how much the seller owes to the listing firm. And then the listing firm's going to decide how to divvy that up. And then other people decide how to divvy it up from there. And everybody's got to get paid. Okay. There we go. So now, buyer agency agreements. These are more flexible than listing agreements. Why do you think they're automatically more flexible? What thing have we pointed out that's very different between buyers and sellers? The relationship can start very differently for buyers than it can sellers. What's that first bullet point? Point out.
It can be oral.
It can be oral. We can now, and I don't think Kate will mind me sharing what her question was regarding, right? Oral.
No worries.
I'm sorry?
I said, no worries, share away, because I was definitely going back and forth with that quiz question for a while.
Oral buyer agency is still buyer agency, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you're still representing them. You've still had a conversation with them about being their agent. If you did not intend to represent them, it's not called oral buyer agency. You would just tell them, when you gave them the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure, if you didn't intend to represent them, what one single statement would you make to them? And that would be the end of the agency discussion with that buyer.
I don't
I
represent.
represent the seller.
I represent the seller. I don't represent you. Can you continue to work with that buyer?
Mm-hmm.
It would be crazy.
Yes. Actually, it'd be great for me, because I don't really want that buyer to have representation. If I represent who?
The seller.
The seller.
The seller.
You
Assuming
mean
I
continue to
represent the
work
seller.
without representing it.
I'm sorry?
You mean continue working with him without representing it.
Correct. I'm going to continue to work with that buyer without representing them by staying the seller's agent.
So
I think this is, I was going to say, I think this is the part where I got confused when I was reading that question, because I assumed, I guess that's where I had the problem anyway, is that I assumed that he was only working with the seller, not the buyer as well, and didn't agree orally to work with him.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. If they do anything for that buyer other than just flatly state, I work for the seller. If they say to the buyer, now I could be your agent, which would mean I couldn't give either one of you advice. And the buyer goes, Well, let's hold off on that. That's still oral buyer agency because the firm offered it. If the firm leaves the door open, that is oral buyer agency. If the firm means to only stay on the seller side, they got to make it very clear from the first conversation. We represent the seller.
Now, in a test question, would it say that they only said that they were working with the seller?
It would say the firm did not offer any type of buyer agency. The firm informed the buyer that they represented the seller. It would be just blunt about it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Yep. Okay. And Candace is exactly right. You can work with, but not work for. They are two different things. Okay. So buyer agency agreements can start as an oral agreement for a period of time. They can also start as written. Remember, we did say that they have to become written at some point in time. And you cannot be compensated as a buyer's agent. Now, you can be compensated as a seller's agent without having a written buyer agency agreement, but that's if you are the seller's agent. Here's what you need to understand. Is it possible for me to show properties that are not my firm's listing?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Am I the seller's agent?
Oh.
Yes.
Am I the seller's agent if it's not my firm's listing?
No.
No.
So I can't be compensated as a seller's agent by showing that property. Does that make sense for y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I have no entitlement to compensation by being a seller's agent if I'm not a seller's agent. So why would I show it? The only reason to show that property is if I am a what?
Buyer's
Buyer's
agent.
agent.
Buyer's agent. That's the reason to show that property. I have every reason to show buyers my own firm's listings, whether those buyers are our client or not, because our firm is going to get paid for selling that property because we already represent who?
The seller.
So,
The seller. Buyer agency agreements only really matter when we're showing property that is not our firm's listing. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's when you need to have a written buyer agency agreement in place, because otherwise you don't have any written agreement that entitles you to get paid. You don't have an agreement with the seller. You don't have an agreement with the buyer. Who the heck's going to pay you? Are y'all following that mindset?
I got kind of lost. If you could repeat that or explain that again.
So when you go out and you show a listing that is not your firm's listing, it's listed by some other firm, you have no agreement with the seller for the seller to compensate your firm. None. So they're not going to compensate your firm. If you want to get compensated, you got to have an agreement with somebody. Well, if somebody is not the seller, that only leaves who by process of elimination?
Buyer.
The buyer. So you better have a buyer agency agreement if you expect to get paid for showing that property. Now, if you expect to show that property and do it for free, go show it all you want to. But if you want to get paid, you better have a written buyer agency agreement.
Travis, there might be some confusion around like the not having a written buyer agency agreement and then going to another firm. Like, what is the deal with your firm and not getting paid if you're representing a buyer?
What do you mean? You gotta clarify that.
So like you had mentioned, I'm trying to think of the phrasing that was just literally used. So I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure it's clarified. So whenever you're going to another firm,
What do you mean? Another firm? You mean showing another firm's listing?
yes, and showing another firm's listing, can you like you're saying when you go to another firm and you don't get compensated being a seller's agent? I'm so sorry, I'm getting this all twisted up.
I'm saying if I go and show another firm's listing, I'm helping them. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping the other firm.
Yes.
Are they not the ones who were hired to sell the property for the seller?
Yes.
They're the
Yes.
listing firm, and you're the
And if
selling
it
firm.
sells, who's going to get paid?
The seller.
Who will get paid? If
The
that
seller's agent.
listing agent.
the listing agent will, the listing firm will get paid because they're the ones that have an agreement with the seller that says sell the property and we'll get paid. Well, that doesn't do me any damn good. So why would I bother to show another firm's listing? What I'm telling you is, if you think you should get paid for showing another firm's listing, then you better have a written buyer agreement, because you can't get paid unless you have a written agreement with either the buyer or the seller. And when you show another firm's listing, you don't have a written agreement with the seller. They do.
Another firm's listing is what I keep trying to go back to. So it's another firm's listing. So when you're showing your own firm's listing, you have your agreement with the seller. But if you're,
You don't need a buyer agency agreement.
Okay.
I don't need a buyer agency agreement to show my own firm's listing. I'm already on a team. Whose team am I on?
The seller.
I'm on the seller's team. Why would I want a buyer agency agreement to show my own listing, my own firm's listing? That's insanity. Because you're putting yourself in what?
Dual agency.
Dual agency for no damn reason.
You just had a nice customer.
Yeah, that's right. We had it where we wanted them, and now we screwed it up. I don't want a buyer agency agreement. Let me put it this way. You don't want a buyer agency agreement on your own listings. You don't. That's the devil. You want a buyer agency agreement when you're showing whose listings?
Another firm.
Other firms' listings, because you need an agreement with somebody. And if you don't have that agreement with the seller, it's going to have to be with who?
The buyer.
The buyer.
In order to get paid.
In order to get paid.
You will be the seller.
But I think maybe the confusion is the buyer's not going to pay you, but you have to have it in writing to be able to present it to the listing firm. And I think maybe that's where the confusion.
Well, and that might or might not be true, Cherry. And so Cherry brings up a good point when she says, but the buyer's not going to pay you. Maybe they are. Here's what you need to understand about a buyer agency agreement. And this is where compensation gets confusing in our business. So I'm going to go to a whiteboard again. Let's say that the buyer this time hires Trav Talks. And with that buyer agency agreement, they agree to pay Trav Talks 3% of the sales price of any property that buyer purchases. Does that make sense for everybody? Because this is a buyer agency agreement, right? So what they're agreeing to is to compensate Trav Talks with 3% of the sales price of the property. Now, they're looking at Trav Talks saying, we expect you will get your money from where, Cherry?
Seller.
From the listing firm.
From the listing firm, from the seller's side, go get it right. But let's say the buyer makes an offer on 123 Main Street. And the listing firm is offering 2% of sales price. And the buyer loves it, and they want to make an offer, and they do, and we get a contract, a sales contract. Now, we have an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the issue we have. The listing firm is compensating Trav Talks with some money. How much?
2%.
2% of the sales price. But does Trav Talks have a contract that entitles them to compensation?
No.
Not with the listing firm, not anymore. No, they have a contract.
With the buyer.
With the buyer. With their client, the buyer. How much is Trav Talks owed?
5%.
3%.
5%
Total 5%.
No,
If it's
no.
3%,
No,
they're only getting
3%.
2.
They're owed. You stop adding it. Don't treat it any differently than the listing side. You didn't do that on the listing side. Don't do it on this side either. The firm's only entitled to whatever their agreement with their client. Don't make it more complex than it is. It's complex enough. How much does their agreement with their client entitle them to?
3%.
3%. But how much are they getting offered from the listing firm?
2%.
2%.
2%.
So the buyer owes them 1 more percent.
We are short. Somebody owes me some money. I only have an agreement with one person. Who is that one person?
The
The
buyer.
buyer.
The buyer. So if the buyer decides to buy 123 Main Street, is there probably some important note we should give them when we're showing them the property?
Yes.
Mhm.
This is a wonderful property. I'm glad you love it, Cherry. But FYI, the listing firm is only offering compensation of 2% on this property. And therefore, if you buy this property, in addition to whatever you pay the seller for the property, you will have to pay the remaining 1% of our commission that is due directly to us.
So if it's listed for 6% and the seller is only offering 2%,
The listing firm, you
potentially-
mean?
yes, then the buyer would end up paying 7% total?
No, stop adding. Stop.
Well, if the seller's already paid 6%,
So that's fine. Who gives a shit what the seller did? This is the buyer. They have nothing to do with the seller. The seller paid their 6%. They're done. And who did they pay it to?
well, they paid Trav Talks.
No,
The firm.
they paid their
The
firm,
listing firm.
whoever their listing firm was.
I keep thinking that. Okay.
They paid their firm 6%.
So in reality, though, the buyer has already paid that 6. That was
The buyer
factored
paid
in,
the
right.
seller for the property. Stop
Right.
making.
So that was already factored in, though. So that was the 6. That's where the 6% comes, right? But they only offered the selling agent 2%.
That's exactly right. That's what I'm telling you. Is the buyer is looking at a property. See, you don't need to pay attention to the selling side. You're doing what everybody does in this business. You're too damn nosy. Who gives a crap? Gives a crap what happened on the listing side. I don't care if they paid a 10% commission, a 20% commission, or a 2% commission. All I know is, as a buyer's agent, they are offering to pay my firm how much in this scenario. Look at this
2%.
scenario and
3%.
2%.
2%. How much am I owed based on my agreement with the buyer?
3%.
3%.
3%. So the only thing that matters, forget all of that on the listing side, because that's making it far more complex than it needs to be. The only thing that matters is this buyer, if they buy this property, is going to have to come out of their pocket for compensation.
And that would be the additional 1%.
That would be the additional 1%.
And you would just rewrite the contract, putting that in there.
What do you mean, write the contract, putting that in there?
Well, they sign a contract with you for
the buyer agency,
3%, the buyer side, but then 2% is going to actually go to you from the seller firm. But do you just rewrite that in that they only responsible paying you 1%?
No, because your buyer agency agreement's going to say, we will try to get our compensation from somebody else, but if we can't, you'll pay us the difference. So
Okay.
all we're going to do is show them, here's what we got, here's what you owe, pay us the difference.
Okay.
That's a separate check coming.
There would be a separate check from the buyer to the buyer's firm.
So the 2% is coming from the listing firm where they're no, I just wanted to get this point because the listing firm is like sort of asking for help to sell the property, right?
Yes, that
So
is
that's where the
absolutely
2%.
correct. That is
And
absolutely
yeah, so that's where that's coming from. But the buyer is saying in total, we're going to owe you 3%, but since that's only 2%, they still need the other 1% from their own pocket.
That's exactly right. And by the way, that's totally within the buyer's control because they didn't have to look at 123 Main Street. When we told them that was the case, could they have said, no, I don't want to look at that property? I'd rather only look at properties where I'm not going to owe you money?
Yes.
Yes.
They could. They absolutely can. That is 100% within their control. Seth, yes, absolutely. I've had this happen.
I haven't.
Absolutely. You're going to get, listen, you're going to get listings out there that are in the MOS even. And you go look, and here's the number you see on there for what they're willing to offer a buyer's agent.
Oh.
And here's the thing. Can I refuse to show that property to my buyer? Can I say to my buyer, I'm not going to show you 123 Main Street?
No, you have to.
I have to. I have to follow their commands, don't I?
Yes.
Yes.
And so I'm
But
going to
then
say, but here's what I am going to say to that buyer.
you got to pay my commission.
Glad to schedule it for you. But just FYI, this seller and this seller's agent are not offering any compensation for people like us, buyer's agents, to bring them a buyer. So in addition to the purchase price, you would owe our full commission if you were to buy this property. Just, I want you to know that before we even go look at it.
But is the contract signed with the buyer at that point before you go out and look at the houses? Like, is that how you would do it?
Well, only if you really want to get paid.
Right.
This
I
is
don't want to show 10 houses and then say, thanks, Rachel, but we'll wait. And then next month or with the next
here's the
or
thing.
whatever.
Here's the thing. If you don't have a written buyer agency agreement, you're basically at the mercy of whatever this number happens to be at all times.
By the listing agent.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Always operating at the mercy of whatever the listing firm decided they wanted to offer if you don't have a written buyer agency agreement. If I have a written buyer agency agreement in place, I can show them any property, anytime, and I'm not concerned about my compensation because I have an agreement directly with who?
The buyer.
The buyer for my compensation.
Hey, Travis, is this where it's like the broker in charge basically kind of takes care of this, or do you as the agent have to figure this out?
Every firm is going to have different policies about how they, are you allowed to work with an oral buyer agency agreement? Are you not allowed to work with an oral buyer agency agreement? Do you have to have written? But most firms do give a lot of flexibility to their agents about when they put these things in writing. Most firms do. Okay. Of course, the one thing they can't be flexible on is the one rule about when it has to be put into writing. When does the real estate commission say you have to have a written buyer agency agreement? No later than time of what?
Presentation of an offer.
Based on what we just saw, is it a good idea to wait though?
No. Gosh, no.
No, you don't want to put yourself at the mercy of somebody else continually, right? Is everybody with me on that? I don't know about y'all, but I like to know I'm going to get paid all the time. The only way I can guarantee I'm going to get paid all the time is have an agreement with my client. Okay. So why don't we do this? Let's take a quick break because it's 10:15, and I need to be more consistent about those today for me. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will talk about more specifics of what these things actually say. Okay.
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 Thank you.
So before we took the break, we were talking about the agency agreements and what is contained in those agency agreements. So let me throw the sharing up there again for you all. And we want to talk about the things that do and should show up in any agency agreement, whether it's a listing agreement, which again, I got to keep going back to the same basics. A listing agreement would be signed between a firm and which client?
Seller.
The seller. or a buyer agency agreement, which would be signed between a firm and their buyer client. The whole purpose of an agency agreement is to set up compensation. And so the first thing, back up, I did that. The first thing that should always be specified is how much is the compensation going to be? What is, how much? You know, is it a percentage of the sales price? Could it be something other than percentage of sales price?
Yes.
I mean, is there anything stopping us from having a listing agreement that just says the seller will pay us $10,000 flat?
Yes, you can do that.
Yeah, we could do that.
They could also do the net of the sale, right?
We could do a net of a sales price, like so we keep anything above $300,000 is our commission. That's called a net. So the most common is the percentage of sales price. Then you could have the flat, and then you could have what's called a net. Those are the three different ways. Do you think the third one's kind of the craziest one? If you had, like, you know, in a listing agreement that said, I want you to sell my house for $300,000, anything above that, you get to keep as your commission. That's pretty nuts, right? Because what if the thing sells for $400,000? You telling me we all of a sudden get to keep $100,000 in commission? Well,
Yep.
that's what it would
Can
be.
the seller change their mind then?
Yeah. No.
Can't change it. We in a contract.
And this is why the Real Estate Commission in North Carolina frowns upon that third one. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not like that third method. The first two are fine. Obviously, the most common is the percentage of sales price. I will actually tell you, though, for me, there's one of these that I use very commonly right here, not necessarily with this number, and not on a listing agreement. I do my buyer agencies as a flat fee. And here's why. I basically have a minimum amount I'm willing to get paid in order to represent a buyer. And I'll tell you why. Are some buyers going to be interested in buying a $60,000 property?
Yeah.
And if I have a buyer agency agreement that even says, okay, you owe me 3% of the sales price, and they buy a $60,000 property, that's an $1,800 commission. What if I had to work 3 months to earn an $1,800? Is that worth my time, energy, effort?
No.
Probably not. So for my buyer agency agreements, very often what I have is a minimum dollar amount that I will put on the buyer agency agreement. And what that essentially says is, this is what my fee is. Now, if you end up buying something where the fee or the compensation that they're offering me is more than that, I'll just take the bigger piece. But you guarantee me at least this much. Does that make sense for everybody, how that could work as a buyer agency agreement thing? So my buyer agency agreements, they all say this. That's what's in every single one of my buyer agency agreements. My fee is going to be $5,000. I don't care if you buy a $100,000 house or a $500,000 house, you owe me $5,000. Now, if you buy a $500,000 house, I'll probably get paid more than that, and that's okay. Because most likely the seller is going to be offering, you know, compensation that would exceed $5,000 on that. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes,
So
yes.
this is a way for just to protect me that I'm going to get paid a bare minimum on every buyer. And that's the way I use the flat one a lot with buyer agency agreements, not with listing agreements. I could, but I don't on the listing side, but I do use that method on buyer agents.
How long does your buyer agency agreements last, Travis? Like, sometimes people take a long time to find a home.
Yeah, I usually do my buyer agency agreements for for 90 days, 3 months.
Okay.
That's my, and obviously we can come back and extend them after that point in time. But I also have very little problem with people being willing to extend them. I mean, most of the time people see the value in my services, and they, the last thing they'd want is to change to somebody else midway through. So yeah, so I don't really try to lock people down for a very long period of time.
Okay.
Because I'm also reminded that I'm also locked in for that period of time. And what I've realized over my career is that there are sometimes that there are clients that I don't want to work with anymore. And so there have been times when I'm looking at that buyer agency agreement thinking, that thing expires in a week and you are a pain in my ass. And I will be glad when it expires because I'm going to tell you to go find somebody else to work with. So I don't like the long
away when you
because I recognize that I'm also bound by that long period of time.
Okay.
So some people might say I have a problem with commitment. I don't know. All right. Does everybody make sense that the number one thing we need to specify is compensation? Also, in addition to the amount of the compensation, it should talk about the conditions under which the compensation is due. Well, there's one that's obvious. If you think about a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement, if the seller closes on their house or the buyer closes on the purchase of a house, is the firm going to be probably owed compensation?
Yep.
That one is obvious. But what I want you to understand is it's not the only time when a firm is owed compensation. Agency agreements go a lot further than that. We mentioned this earlier. So here's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to throw up here an example of a listing agreement. You actually have this in your folder. Well, I feel like I am at some point. Let me stop the share for just a second. See if that helps with opening the file. You all have this in your folder as well on the OneDrive. It's the listing agreement, exclusive right to sell listing agreement.
Okay. Let's see.
So I'm going to pull it up on my end here. Seth's going to link it for you in the chat there. It's in the Realtor Blank Forms folder. It's in their student folder and then Realtor Blank Forms. And it is called the exclusive right to sell listing. There we go. And share. So this is the listing agreement from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Now, as a reminder, not everybody with a real estate license is a realtor. Remember that it's optional if you join the Association of Realtors. We've talked about that. What are the reasons that people might decide they want to become a realtor? They might want to pay to join once they get a real estate license.
Access to the MLS.
Access to the MLS is a big one. The other big one is access to forms that have already been pre-made for you. Because the Real Estate Commission doesn't help you with forms. The Real Estate Commission doesn't give you paperwork to use. Are you going to need paperwork as a real estate agent?
Yes.
Yes.
See, the real estate agent comes up with this rule, says you got to have a written agency agreement. And you say, okay, well, where is it? And they say, well, that's on you. Go hire an attorney. Go draw it up. So they leave you out cold.
I think you mentioned that in this class that anything that the Real Estate Commission does is not there to help make your job easier.
That's right. Their job is not to make your life easier. The Association of Realtors is there to make your life easier, and that's why you got to pay them so much money. So if you are a realtor, you will have access to a lot of forms that help you do the business, and this is one of them. And if you look down at the bottom of it, it actually has at the very bottom, you see where it has the realtor logo down there. So it shows you that it comes from the Association of Realtors and actually comes from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. This is specifically for use in North Carolina. I'm not going to go through this whole thing line by line. It's too much. But there are some pieces of this that we need to talk about. And the first one I'm going to talk about right now is this part about when we're entitled to compensation. So here's the
There's
compensation
just a small lag. It's not bad.
section. I'm sorry?
There's just a small lag. It's not bad. It's just whenever you're scrolling.
Oh, when I'm scrolling there is?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Well, let me do a snip then and see if that makes it better. Maybe I can, are we good now? When I'm talking this way, is it okay? All right.
Yes.
I mean, y'all are so picky. I mean, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. No, I'm kidding. I'm glad you let me know.
For sure.
So this is the compensation section of the form. And I did a snip so I can, kind of doodle on it and draw on it. You know how I like to put my notes on there. Obviously, the first section up here is pretty straightforward. Notice it says the fee, and this is the listing agreement. So this is between the seller and their firm. It says the seller agrees to pay the firm a total fee of. This is that number that I talked about. This is going to be the total compensation that the seller agrees to pay to the listing firm. So somebody give me a number that you want to see on this line here. What are we going to charge this seller?
7.5%.
15%.
Y'all are mean. 15%. I saw Cassie had 8, so we'll do 8. Okay. that was high. That was high enough. So 8% of the gross sales price of the property. Now, here's what I want to point out to you. This next section down here, this fee earned section, is really important because it talks about under what circumstances we have the listing firm. When I say we, I mean the listing firm here has earned the fee. Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to talk about the easy one first, and then I'm going to talk about the more complex one. So I'm going to skip one for just a second. I want you to look at the easy one, number 2 here. It says, if the property is sold, optioned, exchanged, conveyed, or transferred, or the seller agrees during the term of this agreement to sell, option, convey, or exchange the property, and then at any price and upon any terms whatsoever. So let's underline those words right there. At any price and upon any terms whatsoever. So that paragraph says the fee is earned if they do what? If the property is what?
Sold.
Sold during the term of this agreement at any price and upon any terms whatsoever, then the fee has been what? Earned. That's the easy one. Is everybody all right with that? Okay. So if the seller during the term of this listing agreement sells the property at what price?
Any price.
Any price. At what terms?
Any terms.
Any terms. If it's sold, we're owed a commission. Everybody with me on that? Does it say if they sell it to their mama, they don't have to pay us?
Nope.
No.
Does it say if they take a really low offer price that they think is ridiculous, they don't have to pay us?
No.
Any price.
At any price, at any terms, as long as they agree to do it during the term of this agreement, they owe a commission. Is everybody all right with that statement right there? Do we understand that? So that is the basis of the listing agreement. It goes even further than that.
Oh, commission to the listing firm or
To the
to
listing
the
firm. This is the circumstance under which a commission is owed to the listing firm. So if during the term of the listing agreement, the seller agrees to sell the property, they go under contract to sell the property to any buyer at any terms, they owe the listing firm whatever fee is up there on that line.
8%.
8% of the sales price.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But It goes even further than that. I'm going to back up to the previous paragraph, because the previous paragraph is the one that nobody really likes to talk about, but it's the one that's the whopper. It says, if a ready, willing, and able buyer is procured by the firm, is procured by a cooperating real estate firm, so that's not just, so they're saying if the listing firm brings a buyer, or if some firm they're cooperating with brings a buyer, right? Or if the seller does it, or if anyone else does it during the term of this agreement. So you're telling me the buyer could come from Mars and the listing firm would still be owed a compensation, even though they had never talked to that buyer, never heard of that buyer, never seen that buyer? Is that what this thing says? Couldn't possibly be that airtight, could it?
It can.
It is.
It's called exclusive.
The exclusive right to sell, baby. This is your best friend in this business, because this takes all the excuses out of it. I don't care where the buyer came from. Good. Pay me. Good. Pay me. Oh, it's your friend? Wonderful. Pay me. They never called my office? Even better. Pay me. Now, obviously, it doesn't work that way most of the time. Most of the time, we're very involved. But this agreement says it doesn't matter how involved or how not involved, because that paragraph says it doesn't matter where the buyer comes from. Now, this is where it's about to get, y'all ready for it to get deep here? Y'all ready for it to get real deep?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna take a snip of another page here, because I'm gonna show you how these things tie together. Actually, I might be able to do it all on one. No, I didn't quite do it that way.
Can you hear my typing?
Yes, obnoxious.
No, really, can you?
Very faintly.
Okay.
Very
I have
faintly.
a book under it.
All right, so just before the compensation section, I want you to look at what we have here. We have the list price. Let me tell you why list price is so important. This is your assignment. This is your job. This is what you've been hired to do. So if the seller says, okay, I want you to list my property for sale for $400,000, and I'm willing to accept cash, and I'm willing to accept conventional financing, but I'm not willing to accept anybody who has an FHA loan or anybody who has a VA loan or a USDA loan, because I know those people probably don't have a whole lot of cash to put down, and I'm worried about that. So I'm only willing to accept cash buyers or conventional buyers. Can the seller make that determination? Is it their property? Can they decide what kind of buyer they want?
Yes.
Yes, they sure can. This is the assignment. This is the mission impossible. Your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to sell this house for $400,000, either cash or with conventional financing. Does that make sense? I mean, could a seller not check any of the financing? Could a seller say, nope, I only want cash?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, it's their choice how they want you to market their property. And it's your choice not to take the listing if you don't agree with it. But once you've agreed to that, and we said we were going to charge 8% here, well, we talked about if the thing closed, we were owed a commission. Everybody's good on that, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be owed 8% of whatever it sells for, not 8% of $400,000. If it sells for less than $400,000, are we going to be paid on the $400,000, or are we going to be paid on the sales price?
Sales price.
Sales price. If it sells for more than $400,000, are we going to be paid based on $400,000 or are we going to be paid based on the sales price?
Sales price.
Sales price.
And here's how I know that. It says 8% of the
sales price.
Gross sales price. It doesn't say 8% of $400,000. It says 8% of the sales price. So we know if the property closes, we get paid. We know it doesn't matter where the buyer comes from. But I want to talk about this short little statement right here. If a ready, willing, and able buyer is procured by the firm. Actually, I'm just going to back up and just say, if a ready, willing, and able buyer is procured, because we know it doesn't matter by who. If a ready, willing, and able buyer is procured. The word procured is a funny word. Procured means obtained, found.
Right.
That's all. I mean, it just means if we find a ready, willing, and able buyer. But here's the thing. Does the seller have to accept an offer? Do we force sellers to accept offers?
No.
Oh.
But we have to tell them every offer.
We do have to tell them every offer. So, I mean, let's just, just hypothetical purposes. Let's say I bring them an offer that's $410,000 cash. And they say, nope, not accepting it. Do they have the right to say that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yes. They have the right to not accept it. Nobody can force a seller to sell their property.
They can force them to pay us.
But have we done our job?
Yes.
Did we find a buyer who was ready to do this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Did we find a buyer who was willing to do this?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. More.
And did we find a buyer who was able to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that is check, 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 pay me. You can decline that offer all you want to, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. You still owe a what?
Commission. 8%.
There are going to be test questions about this, multiple ones. And people
If they don't
miss
pay, you
them.
can sue them.
People miss these test questions because they want to so associate the only time we get paid or the only time we're entitled to a commission is when the property actually sells. That's not true.
Ooh, wow. Never knew that.
Yes.
Now that's a night opener, Travis.
There you go.
Isn't that cool? This is the time during my class where I was kind of like, and I was like really enjoying it.
So
Because we're doing what the contract states.
that's
Whether
exactly right. If you hire somebody to cut your grass and they cut your grass and you tell them in the contract, I want you to cut the grass an inch tall. And they're like, you sure about that? Yep, I want it cut an inch tall. And they cut it an inch tall. And then you go out there and you look in your lawn and scalp and you hate it. You can't refuse to pay them. They did what?
what you
you
asked.
Good work.
Exactly what you asked for. Could a seller put their property on the market and immediately realize they underpriced it?
Yes.
Yep.
Suppose they get 20 offers and they're all over $400,000 and they may go, holy crap, we underpriced this thing. Could they realize that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Too bad, honey. You hired me to find you a buyer at $400,000 and I not only did that, I did better. Now, you don't have to sell to them, but you do have to pay me.
I got a question on that. So they decline it. Yes, they have to pay you, but are they paying you off of what was offered, or are they paying you off of the strict 400,000?
Off of what was offered, because that would have been
The new sales price.
the sales price.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a question.
Go for it, Cassie.
So what in this buyer agency agreement, what if there's already, for the listing agent, there's like this I guess added bonus where if you bring a buyer, you get an extra, let's say $3,000 within a certain time period. Would those types of things be added into this contract by an attorney or?
Into a listing agreement? So what are you asking me here? This
would those, yeah, would that?
This is a listing agreement between a seller and a listing firm.
Right.
So this agreement has nothing to do with what is what is offered by the listing firm to other firms to help them find a buyer.
Okay. I was just wondering, just because they talk about the financing and bringing what's applicable to the table, so I didn't know if an attorney would have to add that in.
Most likely, yes. I mean, most likely if you're doing anything outside the box, outside the ordinary, you'd probably have to get an attorney to make adjustments because this is a very standardized sort of agreement.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Patrick, your question about what if the buyer puts, unreasonable demands? Well, if the seller is concerned about those kinds of things, they need to put that in this listing agreement, that they have that they want a buyer who's willing to pay $400,000 cash or conventional and gives them at least 45 days to close. Outside of that, if that's not in this agreement, then they don't have that kind of a protection. Now, here's the reality. Do you think many real estate firms go after sellers for commissions on properties where they don't accept an offer? Do you think that happens very often?
No.
But no, it didn't happen to my in-laws.
No, because it's going to give you a terrible reputation. But that's not the way they're going to test this stuff. They want to know. They're not testing you on what are the practical applications of this. They're testing you on, do you understand that there is an entitlement to a commission the moment that the listing firm has produced a buyer that is ready to purchase at the terms the seller laid out, willing to purchase at the terms the seller paid out, and able to purchase at the terms that the seller laid out. If all three of those things are true, then the commission is owed. Whether you actually try to collect it or not, that's an entirely different practical discussion. But this is definitively what makes it owed. Now, so I have to ask this. Let me back up here for a second. What if the offer looks like this right here? What if we get an offer that is for $398,000 cash?
That didn't make it yet.
Have we produced a buyer that is ready to do what the seller hired us for?
It's not 100,000.
No.
He accepted.
But he's ready to buy.
I said we brought an offer.
Yeah.
We have the offer, and the seller has accepted. The seller says, no, I'm not accepting the offer. They reject it. Can we make a claim that we're owed a compensation then?
No.
No, because the buyer is not ready to pay what?
The asking price.
The asking price.
$100,000. We've not produced a buyer that's ready to do those things. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
But does it change if that offer is accepted?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, because if it is accepted, then we go to this paragraph, which was the first one that we talked about, that says what? If the property is sold, and I'm going to erase this to get it out of the way, or the seller agrees to sell it during the term of this agreement, at any price and upon any terms whatsoever. So even if we produce an offer that's less than what we were hired to bring, but they accept it, are we still owed a compensation?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, we got them going and coming on this thing. If we bring you an offer that's the way you want it, gotcha. If we bring an offer that ain't the way you want it, but you take it anyway, gotcha.
So there's no way, that's basically to protect you in every single way possible, mostly?
That is why we know of this type of agreement, the exclusive right to sell. This is the listing firm's best friend right here. This is the best, this is the gold standard of listing agreements from a real estate firm's perspective, because it has the most protections for the firm and the least protections for who?
For the
Who's the other party signing this thing?
So
The seller.
Oh, yeah.
This one has the most protections for the listing firm and the least for the seller.
client.
Therefore, this is the gold standard one in the industry. And matter of fact, I've been in this business for 2 decades now. I've never seen anyone other than this one in real life. Now, we're going to talk about different ones in the class, but in real life, I've never seen anyone different than this one, the exclusive right to sell.
So this doesn't offer that much protection for the buyer?
Has nothing to do with the buyer. It's a great question. It has absolutely nothing to do with the buyer, because this is a what kind of agreement?
Listing
agreement.
between the seller and the firm.
Between the seller and the firm. This has nothing to do with the buyer. The buyer
Buyer beware.
The buyer will never see this agreement. The buyer will never know this agreement exists. If the buyer has representation, they will have their own agreement with their firm, but it will be called a what?
Buyer
agency.
Is an agency agreement.
This agreement has nothing to do with the buyer. Everybody with me on that?
And I just wanted to ask, you don't have to have all those like bullet point 1, 2, and 3 checked off to get paid, right? It can be one or the other.
Right. When you're looking at the things in this paragraph, it's when any of these, if you notice right here, so I'll erase some of this to get it out of the way, Avi. It says the fee shall be deemed due and payable, deemed earned under any of the following circumstances.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. Under any of them. Sharon said, do we collect at the end date of the contract if the seller refuses the offer? Sharon, I would say if the seller refuses the offer, you're entitled to a commission from that point forward. How you collect, when you collect, would be entirely a decision your firm would have to make. And most likely it would be your broker in charge. You would sit down with your broker in charge and they would decide how they're going to proceed. Are they going to go after it? Because ultimately, if there's going to be a lawsuit filed against the seller for this commission, who's going to have to make that call?
Firm.
The firm. But who is the firm? I mean, the firm is just an idea. The firm can't do anything. Who is the firm?
The big in charge.
The broker in charge. The broker in charge is the firm. As far as, so making decisions and doing something, it's the big. Because a firm, it's just it's on paper, right? It's going to be the big who decides. Okay, we all good?
Yes, I just wanted to touch base back on Avi's question really quick. It's all 3, ready, willing, and able. I'm sure you just caught that because I heard you say, oh, but it's not like you can't have a ready buyer.
It is all 3. If you are claiming item number 1, then it has to be all 3 of the things in number 1. But I think what Avi was asking, at least the way I took the question, was, can it be number 1 or number 2, or does it have to be both number 1 and it doesn't have to be? It's either of these things down here. But to claim compensation under number one, then it has to be everything within number one.
Gotcha.
Okay. So that is the way a listing agreement works. Now, all agency agreements, whether they are buyer agency agreements or listing agreements, remember they are two separate things, have to have an expiration date. That's going to show up on the test. There's no such thing as an open-ended agency agreement in North Carolina. There is no rule about what the expiration date has to be. They don't tell you, oh, you can't do more than 60 days or 90 days. That's not the way this works. But they do have to have a real expiration date. They also have to have a non-discrimination clause. We're going to talk about fair housing laws after we do rentals, leases. But there has to be a statement in there that basically says that all of the real estate agents involved in the transaction will participate in a non-discriminatory manner. So you don't need to worry about learning these protected classes right now. We're going to go through this whole list of things. We're going to go through in detail when we talk about the fair housing laws. You just need to know for now that there has to be a statement saying that we will not discriminate. The other thing that all agency agreements have to have in North Carolina is they have to clearly show who is signing them on behalf of the firm. If you think about it, the broker in charge is not going out and doing all these listing presentations. It's the individual licensees, the individual salespeople, the individual provisional brokers or non-provisional brokers who are going out and dealing with, by the way, do not be intimidated by that word salesperson. That's just somebody who works for a firm. Okay, that might show up on a national section of the exam. So I know we don't call them that in North Carolina, but it could show up on a national section of the exam. The salesperson and an agent are the same thing. Mm-hmm. So the individual people, agents, salespeople, brokers that go out and deal with these sellers and these buyers, they're going to be the ones signing these agency agreements on behalf of the firm. The Real Estate Commission says you have to identify yourself on there. If you're the one sign, so like for example, Seth, who by the way owes me paperwork for a transaction he has going on, his buyer agency agreement, somebody signed it on behalf of our firm. That somebody would be him. He has to identify himself and his license number on there because we have to clearly show that the person who signed for the firm was actually affiliated with the firm when they signed it. Are we all okay so far? We feel all right? Because we're about to shift gears a little bit. I mean, make sure you're okay before we do that.
A little bit winded, but let's go, move on.
Part of getting agency agreements in place is you got to know how to find clients. In fact, that's going to be by far your biggest challenge. And it's not something we teach you in these classes. Learning how to obtain a license doesn't teach you anything about how to actually find clients, people that are going to buy and sell things. But what we do teach you is what not to do when looking for clients, what laws you cannot break when you are searching for clients. That's what solicitation means. Solicitation is just looking for clients. So without looking at the slide, because the slide's going to focus you on one certain thing, but what are some ways you might go out looking for clients? What are some ways you might communicate with people and say, hey, I'd love to represent you?
Network.
Internet
at work.
Signs outside, driving around.
Signs.
Giving out cards.
Giving out cards. Yeah. All of those things. The email.
On Facebook Marketplace, see what's out there, see if they want to be represented.
Facebook.
Open house.
Instagram, open houses, Snapchat.
Door knocking.
Door knocking.
Well, yeah, last year you could.
of knocking on people's doors. All of those things. That makes sense for everybody? There is one that is on that list of ways that you might communicate with people that is much more highly regulated than the others by federal law. And that one is the telephone. Making a phone call. And by the way, sending a text from the perspective of federal law is the same thing as making a phone call because they are tied to the same number. So everything that applies to these rules, the way these rules apply to phone calls, they also apply to what?
Text message.
Text messages. There is a law in the United States of America, even though I know it feels like there is not one because it is not well enforced, called the National Do Not Call Registry. The idea of the Do Not Call Registry is that people, and it's not a real estate law, but it affects us in real estate because we market ourselves. It is a marketing law. The idea of the National Do Not Call Registry is that consumers, you, me, everybody else, can make a decision that they don't want to be marketed to over the phone. And once you make that decision, you should be able to place yourself on a list where it simply says, what's the name of it? Do not what?
Call me.
Oh.
Don't call me to market to me.
Car warranty's expiring.
You're not allowed to call me to market to me. That's what solicitation's about. So give me examples, and I have to do this. I have to drag you through the mud on this because if you just try to memorize stuff, you'll get to the test and you're like, no, that's not what they're talking about. Yes, it is what they're talking about. Give me an example of a marketing phone call that a real estate agent may make. What do you think?
I'm interested in buying your property. Are you interested in selling?
Are you interested in selling your property? Because I'd love to do what?
Buy it.
Sell it for you.
Now, buy it, that's not a marketing call. You're calling them as a buyer and they're a seller. That's not a marketing call. You don't, remember, that's not real estate. So give me that same phone call as a real estate agent. I'm talking about a marketing phone call.
I'd like to represent you.
I've seen that.
I would love to represent you.
I like to represent you.
Are you interested in selling your house? Because I really need some things to sell in your neighborhood. We could list your house and man, we could get a lot of money for it. Is that a marketing phone call?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because not only am I talking to them about the potential of them selling their property, but I'm talking about the potential of me listing it for them, marketing it for them. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. That phone call might be illegal.
Ooh.
The only way I know is I have to check first to see if that person is on what list.
The National Do Not Call Registry.
The National Do Not Call Registry. Are y'all all clicked into the right mindset now of what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. That phone call.
The registry.
And by the way, that phone call could come with a $25,000 fine if they are on that list. It has the potential for up to a $25,000 fine if they're on that list. So it's a big deal if you are fined for it. Okay. Now, where do you find the list? You can go to donotcall.gov and the list is there. You can search. There are companies who will also like scrub your contacts for you. You can upload your contacts into a website and it'll go through all your contacts and it'll say these people are on the list and these people are not. So would that be something helpful if you were in this business to know who you could call and market to and who you couldn't?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, that's the rule. That's the law. So before you call, you should always do what?
Check the list.
Check the list.
Check the list. Here's the thing, and this is what they're going to test you on. They're not going to test you on the rule. They're going to test you on the exceptions to the rule. There are some very narrow exceptions that are available, Exceptions mean you go outside the rule, right? There are some very narrow exceptions available where you can still call people even though they are on the do not call list. And we're going to talk about the 3 of them now. But let me back up. You have to be really detailed with these kinds of questions. These exceptions only apply if somebody's on the list. If somebody's not on the list, can you market to them?
Yes.
Yes, all you want to. It's not illegal to call anybody on the phone for marketing purposes. It's only illegal to call people for marketing purposes if they put themselves on the list. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
I mean, I have one lady in class go, this do not call registry doesn't work. And I said, yeah, I agree with you sometimes. I said, how long did you put yourself on the list? She goes, what list? So, well, that's why it doesn't work.
You gotta be on it.
Yes, it ain't gonna work.
Well, it still kind of doesn't work after the fact, but
well, that's beside the point. You're right. It doesn't work either. But if you never put yourself on the list, it certainly isn't going to work. It might work a little bit at least if you put yourself on the list. So here are the exceptions. Okay. So these would be people, you've done your research, you've checked the list, they're there, but you still want to call. You have to ask yourself, do they meet one of these 3 exceptions? Is the person that you want to call a for sale by owner? And are you calling them because you have a buyer for their property? I'm going to say that again. So this is exception number 1. This is number 1. Are they a FSBO? And are you calling them for what reason?
If you have a buyer already.
You have a buyer for their property. Let me tell you what they're going to do to you on the test. This has got Kate written all over it on the test, by the way. They're going to say on the test, Seth's property is for sale by owner, and he is on the National Do Not Call Registry. Kate is a local agent, and she contacts Seth and informs him that she has many buyers in the area who would potentially be interested in his property. Would he be interested in hearing more about her services and getting his property on the market? Is this an example of a violation of the National Do Not Call Registry?
Yes.
Yes.
That is a clear example of a violation of the Do Not Call Registry. Because
you have to have a particular buyer.
Right. And the purpose of Kate's phone call was not to say, I have a buyer.
It was for
The
marketing.
purpose was to say what?
I want to list your home.
I want to list your home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Y'all see that that's not allowed, even though he's a FSBO. You can't call them to solicit their listing. What would be the allowable phone call? For Kate to call Seth and say what?
I have a potential
A buyer who's
I have
very
a
interested.
buyer. They want to look at your property. Can I bring them and show it to them? But Kate wouldn't be a listing agent in that case. She would be who?
A buyer's agent.
Buyer's agent. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what the exception is. That's exception number 1. Are we all good on that one?
Yep.
Why wouldn't the first example you gave with Seth and Kate be legal?
Why would it not be legal? Because the purpose of the phone call was to solicit the listing. When I say, oh, Seth, you know, I was just calling because I have a bunch of buyers in the area who'd be interested in property like yours, and I'd love to talk to you about putting it on the market and so that we can market them. I'm not calling him on behalf of a buyer client. I'm calling him to try to turn him into my client. That's solicitation, and it's not allowed. Not to somebody who's on the Do Not Call Registry.
Because you're trying to put Seth's home on the market for him.
Because I'm trying to get his business. I'm not calling on behalf of a buyer client that I represent. I'm calling to try to get his business. That's a very different call.
So like I have a house. and I put a sign in the, or I put a sign in the yard, for sale by owner, and I'm on the do not call registry. This is the setting we have.
Right. And so basically what you said is call me for one reason only. If you have what?
Buyer.
A buyer that you're going to bring to my house. Don't call me because you have a bunch of buyers and you want me to list with you. Call me when you got one buyer that you want to bring.
There has to be one buyer.
Right. A specific buyer, not some generic, oh, I know lots of buyers. No, that's bullshit. You're
I was
calling
going
them
to
out.
say, what if I have the potential to bring them buyers? You got to have the name.
You got to be ready. You're calling to set up a showing. That's exactly right. You're calling them to say, I have a buyer who wants to come over there today and look at your house. Is that okay? That's the phone call we're saying that is allowable.
This would be a good example for you to establish the buyer agency agreement, right?
That obviously you'd have to have a buyer agency agreement here because you don't have an agreement with who?
The seller.
The seller. So it'd be really important to have a buyer agency agreement here.
Calling them saying you represent the buyer anyways, right?
I'm sorry?
I said you would be calling them saying you represent the buyer anyways, right?
That's exactly right, John. It would be the first thing out of your mouth, right? And hey, I'm calling you because I represent the buyer and we'd love to come look at your property. That's exactly right. So it's basically like calling to set up a showing is allowed. Is everybody all right with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's number one. Number two possibility as an exception to the rule. It says consumers can be contacted up to 3 months after inquiring to a real estate agent. So this would be somebody who reaches out to us. Now, what are the ways that people might reach out to us?
Phone call.
A phone call and a call up.
Email.
Yep.
Clicking on your link.
If
Facebook.
If they email us and they say, hey, my name is Amber and I'm interested in your listing over on Maple Avenue. My email address is this and my phone number is this. Do we now have permission to give them a call?
Yes.
Yes. By them providing that information, they gave us permission to call. But if you notice, they didn't give us permanent permission to call. How long does the law say that permission is good for?
3 months.
3 months. You need to know that for the test. Now, of course, if somebody's not on the do not call registry, do you have permanent permission to call them anyway?
Yeah.
These are only for people that are actually on the list. Okay. So somebody comes to your open house and they fill out an information sheet and you've got name, email, phone number. If they put their phone number, they give you permission to call.
Yes, they did.
Yep.
Yeah. If they go on your website and they fill out a, get more information thing and they give you their phone number, that's permission to call. If they call you and leave you a message and you return their call, that's permission to call. They can't claim you violated the do not call registry in any of those cases, as long as you stay within 3 months.
What about if you are out at a gas station, you have no business cards, you just exchange phone numbers, you shoot a text, and then they respond and acknowledge yours?
Well, if they respond and acknowledge, you're okay, but I wouldn't send the text first. I'd have them text you, because then that's clear that they made the inquiry. If you're at the gas station, see if you can give them your cell number. Say, hey, let me give you my cell number. Shoot me a text real quick and I'll respond to it.
Or a business.
That way, if it ever came up, who contacted who, you could say, oh, there it is right there. They reached out to me what?
First. Let do the inquiry first.
So
I don't think they'll ask you like that.
Self-example, he said they gave me their number.
Right.
But you're saying that even in that case, provide them our information and let them reach out to us first.
I just think having proof of it would be so much better.
Okay.
To have some, because they may say, I didn't give you my phone number. I mean, people do that kind of thing. Now, they're not going to give you that to distinguish on a test. They're going to be very clear about, who initiated something. But I would just say as a business practice, if somebody did that, I'd want to have them reach out to me first that I could show it. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's number 2. We all good on that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
By inquiring, Right. By inquiring, it could be like if they like you said, sign up on a sheet to get phone calls from you on a not that.
Anything where they give you their phone number. Any inquiry at all where they've said it's okay to reach out to them. Doesn't matter what they're asking you about. They could have come to one of your open houses. You could have met them at the state fair and gave them your business card. Anything where they reached out to you and said, hey, we'd like to hear from you, or here's our contact information. That counts as an inquiry, and you now have permission to call them. By the way, how many times do you have permission to call them during this 3 months?
Many times as you like.
As many times as you like. The law does not say you can call them one time. It says as many times as you would like. They open the door for 90 days. Everybody all right with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. The third possibility here for an exemption is your past clients. Once someone is your client, you have up to 18 months after you worked for them to continue to reach out to them via the phone. Of course, you can reach out to them in other ways as much as you want to, but phone, if they're on the list. So even and this is a tough one now. Let's say I sold somebody a house 2 years ago, and I just haven't done the best job of staying in touch. I lost track. We haven't talked in a while. It's been 2 years since we talked, 2 years since they closed. And I have a buyer right now who came to me and said, I'll pay $1 million for, and they give me the criteria, and it's exactly the house I sold those people a couple years ago.
Too bad.
If my former clients are on the Do Not Call Registry, can I call them to say, hey, I have somebody who'd be willing to pay you $1 million for your house?
No, I cannot.
Oh,
No.
That's really hard. No.
I cannot.
It's been 2 years.
Unless the buyer wants to look at that specific property.
But even then, only if the property is listed for sale by owner. If it's just off the market and I happen to know about it, I can't call those people and harass them about bringing a buyer over there. See, they have to, in every case, notice who opened the conversation first. It's always the person who's on the Do Not Call Registry, right? They had to put a for sale by owner sign in front of their yard and ask people to call. They had to fill out something on my website and ask to be called. It's always them who has to start the thing. And so if it's more than 18 months ago, still can't call them.
But again, this only applies for the Do Not Call Registry.
This only applies to the Do Not Call Registry. Could I send them an email and say, hey, I got somebody who wants to pay you $1 million for your house. Give me a call. Could I do that?
Yep.
I like the way you think, Daniel. That's exactly. Could I drive over there?
Oh, yeah. Quick.
And ring the doorbell and run 15 feet away and say, listen, I know it's coming up, but we got to talk. Yes, we can do all of that.
So this is based on only using the phone.
That's it. That's exactly. And that's why we have to have a longer discussion than it seems like we need, because what happens is you hear this and you start to try to apply it to a bunch of other things. These are very specific rules that only apply to what? The phone, and only apply to people who have put themselves on that list about the phone.
Anything that is attached to a number.
Anything attached to a number. So telephone calls or texting. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's their number. It's not their name. So if they change their number, they're no longer on the list.
They have to re-register the new number. It is by number. Yes, it is by number.
But I can email them all day.
You can email them all day.
Anybody on the Do Not Call Registry.
That's right.
Okay.
The Do Not Call Registry does not cover email. You can send them postcards. You can send them emails. You can go knock on their door. You can sit out in front of their house with a bullhorn and yell at them. You can do anything else. You just cannot call them. Okay.
You're going to let them know, just not by phone.
That's it. I'm not saying don't reach out to them. I'm just saying don't call them. That's it.
Follow up, follow back, and follow through by email.
Right. Okay. Are we good?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good.
I throw a walkie-talkie in their yard.
There you go. There you go.
Composing his
Throw a paper airplane at them for all I know. I mean, do something, but don't call. There are laws regulating email. They're just not nearly as strict. The Can-Spam Act is the law that regulates email transmissions. And there's also one that regulates faxing, junk faxing people. If you can find a fax machine, I don't think
I was like, who's got junk faxing?
I mean, it used to be a thing, but you know, fax machines are very, very rare now. They're usually only used in medical settings now and some legal settings.
Oh, that's
Believe it or not, they are still one of the most secure methods of communication we have. You cannot hack a fax machine. You can hack somebody's email, you can forge electronic documents, but you can't hack a fax machine. And that's why most pharmacies operate with them. You know, so like if you have a doctor that's sending prescriptions into a pharmacy, they're almost always faxed because they're more secure. So that's about the only places you see them still.
That must be why it always takes forever for the prescriptions to come in.
It is. It is. It's one of the reasons. Yes. And some of you don't even know what a fax machine is or does. I can just tell you, you haven't missed much. They were obnoxious in every imaginable way. They were loud. They didn't work. They would cut off halfway through a page. They, you know, it was, ugh. And we thought they were incredible. We were amazed by them. But
I still got one.
I wouldn't tell anybody that. But
Travis, you remember when the paper used to roll up?
The thermal paper? Oh, that was the worst because if you left it in your car, the whole thing turned black and you couldn't read it. I do. I remember. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you guys lived in ancient times.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I also grew up with records too, Seth, and those are back cool now. So there you go.
Yes, and those are back cool. And everybody wants a little record player.
All right.
Everybody laughed at me. You know, records. You so old fashioned, and now everybody wants to pay me like $1,000.
Yep. They sound the best.
Exactly. They sound the clearest and the best, the most crisp.
The millennials are gonna bring the fax machine.
It's crazy
back.
what people are willing to pay for vinyl now. You know, I mean, I remember going to like the record store and like flipping through the bins and like stuff was 99 cents, you know, and now that same record, if you got it in good shape, someone will pay you $50 for it. It's insane.
Yeah.
But the Can-Spam Act is very straightforward for email. Only thing you need to know about emails, you can send as many as you like as long as you include one thing. And what is that?
Unsubscribe link.
Unsubscribe.
Law enforcement still use that. I used to work at the Medicare examiner's office for 13 years. And that's how they used to send information over relating to homicides and things like that.
Yep. There you go. I don't even want to talk about faxing memes. That's a meme in and of itself right there. I think that whole idea is a meme, faxing. Here's the funniest thing the funniest story I have about faxes, and I'll leave it alone, is that this was quite a few years ago now. We had an older agent in my office, and she struggled with technology. And we had an e-fax, and she didn't understand that. We didn't have like a physical fax machine. What we had was a fax number that actually just converted it to a PDF file, and then you could, you know, it went to your email and it would print it out. And we would tell her, just give them that number. She said, but where does the paper come out? It doesn't. It's going to come to your email, and then you can print it from there. So we finally got her working with that, right? And then she said, well, how do I send a fax? Well, do you really need to send a fax? Yeah, I got to send a fax. They don't have email. No, they only have fax. I said, so then we had to show her how she could scan something and send it through an e-fax. Is everybody following me on this? Well, come to find out, the agent she's dealing with in the other office, they also only have an e-fax. So what we have is the woman on my end is scanning it as a PDF, sending it as an e-fax to another e-fax, which is converting it back into a PDF and sending it to somebody's email. And neither one of the two of them knew they could just email the damn thing to each other in the first place. I'm like, this is the craziest thing I have ever heard of in my life. This is not how technology is supposed to work, people. But those are the growing pains we have been through in this industry. But yes, faxes are largely gone. Last thing here that we want to talk about, and then we'll take a quick break, is simply the referral rule. And this one is, I think, one that people do make much more complex than it is, because they start to try to think about, well, what about Nevada? And what about California? What about Florida? We can't control any of those states. All we can control is licensure here in North Carolina. And the North Carolina Real Estate Commission says it is okay for North Carolina licensees to receive referral fees and to pay out referral fees. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And the North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not put a limitation on where those referral fees can be received from or where they can be sent to. In other words, do you think it's okay that a North Carolina licensee receives a referral fee for a transaction in Alaska? Do you think the North Carolina Real Estate Commission says that's okay? What do you think?
Yes.
I do.
Now, whether that's allowable in Alaska or not, that's for somebody else to figure out, not the North Carolina licensee. Who would that be whose job would that be to figure it out in Alaska?
Alaska
Board of.
Whoever was paying the referral fee from what? Alaska. That ain't your job. Here's the thing. If you've got a real estate agent in Alaska who wants to pay your referral fee for a transaction there, can you accept it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, as long as you have a North Carolina license in good standing. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission says that's fine. Is everybody good with that?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to know Alaska law. You just need to know you have a license that allows you to accept referral fees no matter where they come from. Are we all good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you pay a referral fee to someone who is licensed in another state for a transaction here in North Carolina? In other words, if someone licensed in Mississippi refers you a client for a transaction in Raleigh, can you pay that someone who's licensed in Mississippi a referral fee for the North Carolina transaction?
Yes.
Yes, you can. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not care that you pay a referral fee for a North Carolina transaction to someone outside of the state, as long as that someone has a license in good standing in whatever state they reside in. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
So the only thing you would be on the hook for, do you need to verify that it's legal for them to accept a referral fee in Mississippi?
No.
No. You only got to verify that you're in compliance with North Carolina law. And the only thing North Carolina law says is you have to make sure they have a what?
License.
A license in good standing wherever they are. Whether that's Mississippi, Missouri, or Michigan, it doesn't matter. Okay?
Actively licensed.
I'm very proud of myself, by the way, on the alliteration there. I was able to pull 3 M states out, just like, there's a lot to choose from in Maine and Maryland and Massachusetts, but I was just able to pull 3 real fast. Okay, so North Carolina only cares that you verify that they're licensed. Here, though, is where North Carolina gets really persnickety, and this is what you need to pay attention to. If you are paying someone a referral fee, and that someone has a license from a state other than North Carolina. Now, this does not apply if they're licensed in North Carolina. But if their licensure is in some other state, is everybody with me on that? And you're paying them a referral fee from North Carolina. North Carolina has one rule. They cannot come to North Carolina from the time they give you the referral to the time you pay them the fee. Period. For any reason. They can't change planes in Charlotte. They can't come through to get gas. If they're in Virginia and they want to buy good fireworks in South Carolina, they got to go all the way around through Tennessee.
Why?
It's just the law.
That makes no sense.
Wait a minute.
It actually does make a lot of sense, because if you didn't do it this way, nobody would bother to get licensed in multiple states. People would get a license in Virginia, and then if they wanted to work a North Carolina transaction, they would come down here and work, do the whole transaction, and they would just say, oh, just call it a referral fee. I don't have a North Carolina license, so you can't pay me a commission, just call it a referral fee. So this prevents that.
They can't enter the state during the, they can't enter the state from during what time frame?
From the time they give you the person's name till the time you pay them. From the time they refer the business to you to the time you release the referral payment to them. They cannot come to the state of North Carolina.
But after they get the payment, then they could come?
Of course they can come after they get the payment.
Okay.
Because the referral's over then. And they can come during the term of the referral. But you can't what?
You don't pay them.
You can't pay them. If they come here from the time after they give you the name, but before you've paid them, you have to tell them I can't pay you by law.
I'm confused. You mean they cannot physically enter North Carolina because of why again?
Because it's the law. Why can you not smoke a joint? There's no rational reason for that. It's the law.
Okay. All right.
You know, it's the same thing. It just.
How would you know?
Hmm?
How would you know if they came?
Well, and
That's very specific.
That's the even better question, Cherry. How would you know? Most likely you wouldn't. And so most likely you wouldn't be held responsible. But if you did know they had entered the state and you knew they had come, because let me tell you what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen, and this is what the Real Estate Commission is trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid people who are not licensed in North Carolina actively practicing real estate in North Carolina. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because think about it. If you had somebody who had a real estate license in Texas, and they had a $2 million buyer moving to Raleigh. Right now, they would refer that buyer to a North Carolina agent to take care of them, would they not?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And they would get paid a referral fee for that.
Mm-hmm.
If they could come to North Carolina and show that $2 million buyer properties, and then just tell the listing firm, listen now, I don't have a North Carolina license, so you just call it a referral, but you pay me that way. If they could get away with that, would they do it that way instead?
Yes.
You would always have people coming from other states and practicing real estate here who didn't have a license to practice real estate here. So yes, this rule seems ridiculous and harsh, but there's a reason for it.
Wherever the market is, right?
There's a reason for it. Okay. You're exactly right, Kate. It protects those who have a real estate license in North Carolina.
I'm glad you explained it, because I was thinking it was only during the closing time.
No, it's from the time they give you the client till the time they actually close.
Mm.
So now, because here's what this is a real life scenario where it might play out. I actually had this happen once. I had a lady call me from Virginia Beach. She was licensed in Virginia. And this was long before I was teaching. This was a long time ago. And she was licensed in Virginia. She was from Virginia Beach. She called and she had been given my name by somebody in Chapel Hill. Her sister was moving to Chapel Hill and wanted to buy a condo and wanted to know if I would represent her sister. I said, of course, I would be glad to. And would I pay a referral fee? I said, sure. You know, because she's licensed in Virginia. And I said, you know, so we negotiated a referral fee and I was glad to do that. And she said, okay, well, my sister is going to be there on Friday. Can you show her some properties? And I, sure. And we set it all up. Went to meet with the sister on Friday. Guess who came with her?
The sister.
The other sister who had the Virginia real estate license.
No, she was one.
And not only did she come with her, but every time we walked in the door to one of these showings, she was like, now, I don't know how things work around here, but this is what I would offer in the contract if I was you. Is she not practicing real estate without a license in North Carolina?
Yeah, she is.
Yes, she is. And that's fine as long as she's doing it for what?
For herself.
For free.
Nothing. For free. For nothing.
The licensure rule is she can do it for free.
Just can't get paid.
Right. And so she can give all the advice she wants as long as she's not getting paid. But if I give her a referral fee, did she get paid for it?
Yes.
Yes. And so now she's practicing real estate for others in the state of North Carolina for compensation. She's got to have a what?
License. North Carolina.
How did you handle that? Did you say?
Well, when she first showed up for the showings, I pulled her to the side and I said, listen, you need to go back to the hotel. You need to go back home because I can't pay you if you're here. And she said, I don't think that's true. I said, it is true. I know it's true. I remember this from class.
And it's not
said,
like I'm a real estate instructor
said, well,
or anything.
She's my sister. I'm going to help her. So I thought to myself, it's okay with me, lady. I mean,
now, okay, I'm going to be real sticky here.
Yep.
What if the sister then goes behind your back and everything else and pays her on the side? Now, is she going to get in trouble?
Then
or is that based on Virginia?
That would be for them to figure out. The sister could get in trouble in North Carolina potentially, and the one could get in trouble for practicing real estate without a license in North Carolina. But that's beyond. Listen, what they do is what they do. Not worried about it. All I need to worry about is me following.
The sister could have been present viewing the homes.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, she's not supposed to be because she referred you.
She could have been present viewing the homes and not get paid. She could not be present viewing the homes and get paid. And get paid. Technically, I couldn't pay her from the minute I saw her in North Carolina. But now we all I realized she may not have known that. So I just told her, I said, listen, why don't you just go back to the hotel? You pretend like you're not here. No, she wanted to go anyway. She wanted, and so I got back and I had a conversation with my broker in charge. He said, well, we're not paying her. Okay, you can have that conversation with him. And he did. And we didn't.
I have a question.
Go for it.
In the first class I took, when we were talking about brokers and referral fees, you mentioned an example where you said this woman, she was older, like she'd been in real estate for a long time and she was getting referral fees. But for referral fees, do you have to make sure your license is still active to receive the referral fee?
Absolutely. The active licensure is required to receive any type of compensation. So your license has to remain on active status to be compensated in any way.
You just don't have to have
So let's say your license is not active right now. You just have to take a CE class. So you go ahead and take it. But in that time, you're supposed to be paid for a referral. Could the referral agent decide later on after you take your course to pay you, or that would be no? Okay.
No, because you're being compensated for the time, the work you did while you were active. So if you weren't active the minute you gave the referral, you can't earn a referral fee.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Are we all good on that?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we do this? Let's just take a quick 5-minute restroom break. It's 11:50, say 11:55, and then I want to get through a couple of things before we do our lunch break. Okay. So let's just do 5 minutes real quick for the restroom, and we'll come back and talk about antitrust. Recording restarted. So when we left off, we had just talked about the payment of referral fees. And now we want to kind of have a bigger, broader discussion about commissions in general and how we talk about them, how we discuss them, how we negotiate them. Because remember, we're focusing on not violating the law. And we talked about not calling people who are, if they're on the do not call registry, not emailing without an unsubscribe link. So we're following up on that discussion. There is a right way and a wrong way to talk about commissions, and you will certainly be tested on this. How you should address the idea of commissions and how you should not address the idea of commissions. First of all, the name of this practice, this illegal practice, is called price fixing. That's the name of it. That is the no-no that we are talking about here. The law that governs this, by the way, is called the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act is the law that says these kinds of things are illegal. Commissions are negotiable. Now remember, commissions are between firms and clients. What's up, Seth?
I was just gonna throw a side note in there because this made me kind of realize antitrust is that kind of what it was, exactly what it sounded like. You need to be able to trust people.
Exactly, and trust were also monopolies, and so the law was set up in such a way as to prevent big groups from acting to prevent competition in the marketplace.
Okay.
And so one of the things that we as licensees have to be real careful of is to never make it seem like we all got together in a big meeting and decided this is what we're going to charge. We're supposed to be competing with each other, which means we should all set our own prices. So setting your own price, negotiating your own price, means you should be doing that on a case-by-case basis with every client. Commission should be negotiated between who?
The firm and
the agent.
Client and their firm, right? Client and their firm. Always. Commission should always be negotiated because that's who's signing the commission agreements. That's who's signing the agency agreement, the firm and the client. And so that negotiation should take place every time between the firm and the client. We should not ever use language like, oh, well, the standard commission is this, or that's the normal commission for the area, or that's the average commission. All of those things are off limits as far as conversations go about compensation. Because, well, let me say this to you all. If I came to class and you said, okay, what do I have to get on the test to pass? And I said, oh, well, the standard is 75. Does it make it sound like to you that I set 75 as the passing score? Or does it make it sound like to you that every real estate class in North Carolina, you got to have 75 to pass?
Every school.
It makes it sound like every single one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The statement should be, to pass this class, you need a 75. Because I can only control what?
What you
This
charge.
class.
Your school.
Your class.
My class. Same
Right.
thing is true about commissions. When you have a discussion with a potential client about commissions, you don't discuss what other people are charging. You don't say, oh, well, the normal rate is 5%. No, you say, we charge 5%. I charge 5%. My office charges 5%. Any of those are okay, but not the normal or the standard or the average. Basically, anything that makes a reference to somebody else's compensation or what some other firm might charge is off limits. Are we all okay with that? And what did I say that illegal practice was called? Was named, I'm sorry?
Sherman
Price fixing.
Antitrust. Price fixing.
Price fixing. The law is the Sherman Antitrust Act, but the practice, the name of the practice is called price fixing. Another type of no-no, according to and this is still the Sherman Antitrust Act. Okay, still the same law. Another type of practice that is outlawed is called group boycotting. So what does it mean when you boycott something? Forget the group part for a second. Let's just talk about a boycott. If you say, I'm going to boycott, what does that mean?
I'm going to use them or buy from them.
Their business anymore.
I'm not going to shop at your business. I'm not going to do business with you. Isn't that what a boycott is? Okay. There's nothing wrong with boycotting. Individual boycotting is fine. Group boycotting is illegal. So what do you think group boycotting is for real estate agents?
We're not going to use
Using a specific person.
this attorney because
Who is we though?
Keller Williams and Caldwell Banker
get together in a room and decide they're not going to use this closing attorney.
Mm-hmm.
That's illegal. That's illegal. You cannot collude with other real estate firms, real estate offices to shut people out of the business. Now, can you as an individual licensee decide, I don't want to recommend that closing attorney, I'm not comfortable working with them? Is that fine?
Yep.
Yeah.
As long as it's just you.
Absolutely. But not as a big group. Not getting a bunch of real estate firms together. That's a no-no.
So the only time group boycotting applies is when two different firms get together and say we're not going to use you.
Correct. That's where the term group comes from. Because if it's one firm, a firm is one thing in the eyes of the law. In the eyes of the law, the firm is the firm. So a firm could easily have a policy of we're not going to use this closing attorney. But what the firm can't do is communicate and collude and decide to do that in conjunction with other firms.
Does it have to be the whole firm, or can it be like one agent from each firm?
What do you mean, does it have to be the whole firm? Laws don't tell you what things have to be. They tell you what things can't be.
Yeah, so like would this apply if it was from one broker from one firm and another broker from another firm say we won't use that? Does that the same apply, or does it have to be the firm?
Individually, or are they getting together in a room and deciding, oh, well, neither one of us is going to recommend this closing attorney?
In a room?
That's group boycotting.
Even if it's just with one agent, like one from each.
More than one is a group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anytime a group of brokerages get together, and if it's one from one firm and one from another, that's from two different sources, and they get together and decide. Now, can they both come to the same conclusion individually? Sure. But it cannot do it as a group.
So is that just like saying blackballing?
That's exactly right. So imagine, Charlene, if you noticed that this lady, Lou, had moved to the area and she was a new agent in the area, and you start seeing all these listings pop up where she's only paying a 1% buyer side commission. Like she's got a bunch of new listings and she's only offering to pay 1%. Would that kind of burn you a little bit if you were a buyer's agent showing property in that area?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because even if you've got a buyer agency agreement that says you're going to get paid more than that, it makes it uncomfortable for you because now you've got to have this conversation every single time with your buyers about how they got to pay more of your commission, right?
True. Yeah.
So are you a big fan of Lou right at this point in time right now?
Nope.
No, you're not. And so you go to lunch with Angela and Daniel once a week, and y'all all three work at 3 different firms, but you went to class together and you just kind of stayed in touch since then. You all three work at 3 different firms, and you bring it up at lunch. And you say, have you seen this new lady, Lou? She got there 1% on everything. And Angela said, I noticed that. And Daniel's like, yeah, I stopped showing her stuff weeks ago. I don't even show her stuff. What if you just said, you know what? That's a good idea. If none of us show her stuff, she'll change. That right there would be that would be group boycotting. That would be a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Okay. So it's not just against a lawyer, it's also against a different agent, a broker.
It's against anybody that you collude with other real estate firms to decide we're going to push them out of business. We're going to avoid doing business with them because we don't like something they do in the business.
So I know this is kind of hard, but how often does that really happen, even though it's against the law?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot. Yeah. We'd like to think not, but obviously more often than it should. How often do you think people, when they go to back up a slide, how often do you think agents, when they go in and the seller says, well, how much are you going to charge me? The first thing out of somebody's mouth is, well, you know, the normal in our area is 6%. How many do you think say stuff like that all the time?
Yeah. All the time.
All the time. And it's illegal every time they do it.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's really just hard to know like how otherwise to say it unless you're educated on it.
That's
because right. Otherwise you would think there is a predominant.
Well, we all know that there are numbers that are common in the market. That doesn't mean we can say it that way, you know.
I normally though.
Right. This is what I do. This is what my office normally charges, but we can talk about that. That's fine. That statement's fine because it's about keeping it internal. But it's when you start comparing to everybody else, like making it sound like we're all one big happy family, because we're not. Michael asked, could it be against surveyors and inspectors too? Absolutely, Michael. It could be anybody involved in the transaction. It could be home inspectors who you think find too much nitpicky stuff on the inspection. So we're just going to all agree, nobody hire that guy because he's too nitpicky and he blows all our transactions up. It could be appraisers who consistently come in low on the appraisal, so we don't want to send them any appraisal business. It could be anybody that you decide as a group of licensees, we're going to steer business away from them. That's group boycotting. Okay, we all good with that? So both of those are examples of the Sherman or violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. So let's get a little bit deeper down into the payment piece of things. And we're going to talk about the different types of listing agreements before we go to lunch. And then after we come back from lunch, we'll talk about how to actually, you know, some of the other pieces of the puzzle that go along with listing a property. But I want to talk about the different types of listing agreements that we get into that you'll see on the test. Now, we already showed you, or I already showed you, the one that is the most common, which is the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Just a reminder, though, there are always 2 sides to every transaction. The listing side is only one of the 2 sides. What is the name of the other side of the transaction?
Selling.
The selling side. You have the listing side and the selling side. You can run and hide from that terminology as much as you want to, but you will not be successful in this exam until you get those sorted out. And that's why I keep bringing them back around full circle. You have the listing side and you have the selling side. So right now, we want to focus on the listing side. Is everybody all right with that? I'm going to focus on the different types of listing agreements that are available for use. And the first one we're going to start with is the one that we already talked about. First thing that I like to notice is my favorite word when it comes to a real estate agency agreement. The word exclusive.
And all the money.
And the reason I like the word exclusive is because the seller in an exclusive listing agreement has agreed that they will hire and pay how many firms?
One.
One. And only one. Is everybody with me on that? One and only one, not two, one. That's what exclusive means. Now, see, this is one of those things where you memorize that and then you don't apply it when you get to the test. I've seen people deal with test questions where they say, Terry has signed an exclusive right to sell listing agreement with ABC Real Estate. She becomes frustrated with their services, so she also signs an exclusive right to sell a listing agreement with XYZ Real Estate. Which of the following is true? And you want to sit there and you want to have an argument with the test question. They can't do that. She can't do that. She signed an exclusive agreement. Can people do whatever they want to do?
Yes. At the end of the day.
Can Terry sign 2 exclusive listing agreements with 2 different firms if she wants to?
She's going to regret it.
She is going to regret it tremendously, but can she sign 2 of them?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, but she owes both of them commission.
That's exactly right. And she owes both of them commission immediately, whether either one of them sells her property or not, because she breached both agreements. She breached both the minute she signed what?
The second one.
Both of them.
The second one. Because on both of them, she said she was doing what?
Working with
Signing for one agency.
Exclusively. She lied with the very first line. I'm working exclusively with one firm. No, you're not. You're working with 2 of us. Pay me. That's how you would handle that on the test. Does that make sense for y'all? So don't act like just because an exclusive agency agreement exists that somebody can't go out and sign another one. Sure they can, but they're going to be in breach of their exclusive agency agreement. Okay? Everybody all right with that? Eric, I'm not sure what you mean. Did the co-broker just go over your head? I'm not sure what you mean.
Did we talk anything about that slide? And I just missed it?
It was just a reminder of the 2 different sides of the transaction, the listing side versus the selling side. And
understood.
That we're focusing on the listing side right now.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
That was it. All right. So in this type of agreement, it's exclusive, which means that the seller has agreed they will only work with and compensate one firm. And we talked earlier about how it says that the listing firm is basically owed a commission as long as a ready, willing, and able buyer is found. And where does that buyer need to come from? What did we say? Where did we say the buyer could come from under an exclusive?
From Mars.
Anywhere.
Anywhere, right? From Mars? Yeah, I thought anywhere. It doesn't matter. And that's exactly what this graphic shows you. This is your exclusive right to sell listing agreement right here, that plumb. And here are your buyers. Buyer, buyer, buyer. And the buyers could come from different sources, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the source of the buyers are. Every buyer ends up in the funnel. And every buyer ends up getting the listing firm what?
Paid.
Paid. Listing firm paid a commission. It doesn't matter where the buyer comes from when you have this type of listing. The listing firm themselves produce a buyer. So let's talk about, let's give examples of those things. I don't like, sort of memorizing stuff. So let's give some examples of the listing firm producing a buyer so we can kind of zero in on what we're talking about here. Give me examples that come from this first faucet here, the listing firm producing a buyer. What are some ways in which a listing firm could produce a buyer?
Open house.
Open house, okay, good.
Maybe from a friend.
Okay, so friend purchases the property. Friend or family, right?
Yeah.
They could already represent a buyer.
But we mean friend or family of like the listing agent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Listing agent advertised it and someone reached out to them to see it.
Advertising, okay. So like signs, right?
Look.
Yeah. Whatever. But all the contact originated with the listing firm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How about a cooperative firm producing a buyer? What are some examples of a cooperative firm producing a buyer?
Like
everything, advertising, open house, same things.
Cooperative firm's not going to be doing an open house.
Oh, that's right.
They just show it.
The other agent,
show it to who?
Their buyer.
There
their buyer sends them a link and they want to see it.
Buyers.
Showing their buyer clients, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Other firms only have one reason to show our listing. That's if we have offered to pay them as a what?
Co-op.
Buyer's agent. Remember, other firms are not the listing firm, folks. Cooperative firms are not the listing firm. They don't get paid unless they produce who as a client?
Buyer.
Buyer. If the seller's not their client, then the buyer would have to be.
Okay.
So could a buyer come from that source?
Yes.
Yes. Would it matter to the listing firm if they have this type of listing agreement?
No.
No, because they would still get what?
Paid.
Paid, because that buyer still makes it into the funnel. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Give me some examples of the seller selling it themselves.
Selling it to somebody they know.
So their mama buys it.
Somebody sees their sign and knocks on the door.
How about somebody at work, co-worker?
Somebody they hear in the grocery store or anything.
That somebody they run into the grocery store. How about they share it on their social media? Do sometimes our sellers, like when they put their house on the market, do they put on their social media, y'all, we're selling our house. If you know anybody looking, have them call. Do they do that?
Yeah.
And I go and look at their house.
Yeah. Any of that stuff. And it don't matter to us. They're just doing our job what?
For
us. Because you call me and you say, I found a buyer. I'm like, here's my thinking when you call me and you say, I found a buyer as a seller. I'm going to show you visually what my thinking is. I like the way this is going. Right? Isn't that exactly what's happening? If the seller calls me and says, I found a buyer, I'm thinking about that funnel. Yep. Right. I like that. Everybody okay with that?
Is there anybody really who doesn't understand? Because sometimes it's hard not to speak up.
Right, exactly.
And I mean, like.
Now, here's what you need to understand, though, before we move on. Not every listing agreement works this way. this funnel is going to get smaller. It can't get bigger because this pretty much encompass every buyer from every possible source right here.
Yeah.
Yes.
It does. So what's going to happen is the funnel, the listing agreement, is going to get narrower. It's only going to capture certain buyers. It's only going to get the listing firm paid under certain circumstances. That's what we're about to talk about.
So this applies to the exclusive listing agreement only.
Exclusive right to sell. The exclusive right to sell listing agreement.
And as we progress in the agreements, that funnel will get smaller.
That's right. It can only get smaller from here and only get worse from our perspective. If you are the listing firm, this is by far the best type of listing agreement to have from the firm's perspective, because there's no limitation on where the buyer comes from, how they were produced. Is there any need to have an argument here about whether or not the seller sold it themselves? If the seller wants to take all the credit, are you just going to go, that's fine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because it don't matter if you sold it yourself, you still owe us a what?
Commission.
Commission.
You can be right or you can be happy.
That's fine. You can have the credit. I'll take the money. Is everybody with me on that?
Yes.
Okay. Because what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about listing agreements where it will matter where the buyer comes from.
So Travis, I just realized that I got kind of mixed up, and I just want to make sure that I'm right. When you say exclusive listing agency and exclusive right to sell, that's two completely different things, right?
Correct. We haven't talked about the exclusive agency listing yet.
Okay.
It's a completely different agreement than the exclusive right to sell listing agreement is.
Okay. Okay.
So what we've talked about so far is the exclusive right to sell listing.
Okay.
I want to make sure you understand this one before we move on to the next one.
And this is the most common?
This is by far the most common.
Okay.
We good on this one?
Yes.
So then let's talk about the exclusive agency listing. Now, at first glance, it seems like this one is good because it has our favorite word in there. What does the word exclusive mean? And that part is still good. What does the word exclusive always mean in an agency agreement?
One.
That specifically the seller has agreed they will work with and compensate what?
One agency.
One firm. There you go. And that's still, is that exactly the same as the exclusive right to sell?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That part is, right? Go back and look. Listing firm is the only firm the seller will compensate. Look, listing firm is the only firm the seller will compensate. So far, are these two agreements exactly the same?
Yeah.
Yes. So far, they are exactly the same. We haven't finished. I'm saying so far they're the same. But this is where they're going to get different. It says the seller can produce the buyer themselves and what?
Not pay.
And not pay. Is that very different than the exclusive right to sell listing?
Very.
That part right there is very different than the exclusive right to sell. Because in the exclusive right to sell, it didn't matter if the seller produced the buyer themselves. Look at your funnel now.
Yeah.
Remember all those things that we said were things a listing firm might do. They might do open houses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They might do a sign in the yard. They might, do any kind of marketing, newspaper marketing, all of that. Do those buyers still make it into the funnel?
Yes.
Do they?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. we said that other firms could produce a buyer. So these were cooperating other outside firms bringing their buyer clients to look at the property. Does that still make it into the funnel and get the listing firm paid?
Yes.
Yes.
Seller calls you and says, somebody from my office made me an offer on my property. You need to come get your sign. What's your reaction now?
I can't.
Can I
You
have
really don't want to know.
$25?
Your reaction is exactly what's there on the screen.
Yes.
Because
Well,
you're not getting what?
Paid.
Paid. Can they sell it to somebody from their office?
Can't.
Of
Yeah.
course. Will they owe you a commission?
No, they.
No.
Nope.
No. Because the type of listing agreement that was executed between the seller and the firm allows the seller to try to sell it themselves without paying a commission. So in essence, are you competing against your own client to see who sells it first?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Could they be doing open houses that you don't even know about when you're not there?
Yeah.
On their own.
Virtual.
I mean, could they be standing out on the street corner waving one of them stupid spinner signs going open house today?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if somebody comes in and looks at it and makes them an offer, is the listing firm going to get paid a commission, or is the seller going to say, I sold it myself, I don't owe you jack?
Sold it myself.
I sold it myself, I don't owe you anything. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand why this type of listing agreement is not the one that is most popular with listing firms?
Yes.
Because they don't get any money from the.
Not only do they not get any money, but what it leads to is these arguments about where the buyer came from. See, here's the thing. Over here, with this type of listing agreement, is there any need to argue? If the seller goes, I did all the work myself, I'm just going to go, you know what? You did. You were awesome. Thank you so much. Because does it make a difference if they did all the work?
No difference where it came from.
No, because there's still what?
Money.
You're still going to pay. But if you got this type of listing agreement and the seller goes, I did all the work myself, boy, we're going to have a debate about that now. Did you? Because I can't agree with you on this. I can't afford to agree with you that you did all the work on this one, because if I agree with you, I'm not going to get what?
Paid.
Paid in my funnel.
Do you see the difference between this, the exclusive agency listing, versus the exclusive right to sell listing?
Does this mean the seller could like eventually drop the agent?
What do you mean eventually drop the agent?
Well, if they don't need their help in finding a buyer anymore.
Do you mean if they give me a specific? You're asking way too vague of a hypothetical. I don't know what you're asking me. So give me something specific.
So if a buyer found a client,
if a buyer found a client, you mean if the
a seller found a buyer,
okay,
then that means the listing firm wouldn't get paid anymore.
That is correct.
But
yeah, they would call us and say, "Come get your sign in my yard because I sold my house to somebody else and I'm not paying you." And that would be the end of it.
So they wouldn't use the agent anymore, sort of.
Well, there's no use for them because what did they hire the listing firm to do?
To sell. Buyer.
Find a what?
Buyer.
They already did it. There's no more use for the listing firm at that point.
So if that would be hard to prove in certain situations though. So if a person you've got open or you've got signs and you've put it on Facebook or whatever, and a buyer driving by knocks on the door.
Yep.
It doesn't call you, but they knock on the seller's door. I mean, that was because of your sign, but the seller might say, no, I bought them.
Jerry, you just made the case of why I would never use one of these right there. because all this invites
Argument.
is argue. That's all this invites is arguments over who found the buyer and who did what and who gets this and who gets. If I have this type of agreement right here, we ain't having any arguments. I'm just going to agree with them and be like, yep, you did a great job. Thank you. Now, here's our bill for our commission.
¿Vas a ir a un lugar a hacerse pinchar?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, never mind.
But yes, this one, the exclusive agency agreement, allows the seller the freedom to attempt to sell it themselves without paying a commission. Does it make sense that this one's not popular?
Yeah.
It just seems like it'd be hard to prove.
It's
So,
very
You as the broker in charge of an agency, Travis, have the right to refuse a seller who approach your firm that you're not going to do this kind of.
That is correct. We don't have to. If a seller insisted that if Seth came to me and said, I've got somebody who wants to do a listing, but they'll only do an exclusive agency listing, my decision as a broker in charge of the firm would be, we're not taking that listing.
Okay.
It would not be a listing I would be willing to take.
I mean, like, you know, now that we know about it because we're studying this, but not many sellers or people out there knows that, oh, they actually have a choice to sell their property like this.
That is correct. That is correct. And I will tell you that, to my knowledge, there are no fill in the blank forms for something like this. So if you actually wanted to have one of these agreements, you'd probably have to pay an attorney to draft it for you, because I've never seen pre-printed fill in the blank versions of one of these. Like I said, I've been in the business 20 years. I've seen a lot of listing agreements. You know what every single one of them said at the top of it?
Exclusive right to sell.
Exclusive right to sell.
And we won't violate any laws if I don't have to mention to them, like, hey, here's another option for you as well.
No, because you only have to present the things that you are offering. You only have to present. And if the only type of listing agreement your firm offers is an exclusive right to sell, then you're under no obligation to present ones that you don't have to say. Like, think about when you go to a restaurant, they don't have to say, well, you know, Dover sole is delicious. And you go, oh, I'll have that. Oh, but we don't serve it. It's just delicious if you can get it somewhere else. I mean, that's the craziest thing ever, right? You don't have to explain things that you don't offer. So you're under no obligation to explain to consumers that this type of listing agreement is in existence if your firm doesn't offer it as an option.
So you can just tell them, this is what we do, this is what we offer. And if they say, well, can I do this? Like, you have to find somebody else for you to.
That's right. Now, you can't lie to them if they say, well, what if I want to be able to sell it myself and not pay a commission? Is that possible? You can't say, oh, no, that's not possible, because that would be misrepresentation, right? What you can say is, well, that's not the type of listing agreements we offer. We offer this. Okay? Do we all see the difference between the two? Good?
Yeah.
So tell me then, I want you to answer this in the chat. Y'all, I'm going to give you an example test question. You tell me which one I'm talking about. Okay? Carlos has executed an exclusive listing agreement with a real estate firm, in which will be valid for the next 90 days, in which he has agreed to compensate the firm under any circumstances that a buyer may arise. This is an example of what type of listing agreement?
Exclusive.
Exclusive right to sell.
Exclusive doesn't tell me anything. There's two types of exclusive.
Right to sell.
No.
Is it exclusive right to sell or exclusive agency? Which one?
Right.
Exclusive right to sell. That is the exclusive right to sell. Okay. Amber has signed an exclusive listing agreement with Trav Talks Real Estate, in which she agrees to compensate the firm for their efforts to produce a buyer, but she wishes to withhold the right to not pay compensation in the event a buyer that she knows from work purchases the property. This is an example of
Agency listing.
that would be an exclusive agency listing. You see the difference between the two?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you're going to have to be able to do on a test. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about the one that's even uglier than this.
Gosh.
Well, I don't know. Some of you may like this. Some of you may like those open relationships. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, some of you like to date exclusively, but some of you may be a little bit more free-willed. I don't know. You know, we just don't know what's going on in your life.
Travis, didn't you say you were afraid of commitment? This would be more along your lines.
You don't use my words against me, young lady. That is not how this works. I'm the only smart ass in the room around. No, I'm kidding.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's pretty good. So, an open listing, just like an open relationship. In an open listing, the seller has not promised to work with one firm exclusively. They've promised to work with the firm, but they haven't promised that will be the only firm they work with. Is everybody with me on that? So could a seller who signs an open listing agreement turn around and sign another open listing agreement with a different firm and another open listing agreement with a different firm? Could they have 8 firms that they hire all at one time?
I guess.
Yep.
Could we have one property that looks like this with 15 signs out at the road if these were all open listing agreements that had been signed?
Now I understand those signs. I have seen them.
So when you see a property with 12 signs, what kind of listing agreement did they sign?
Open
one.
Open listings, okay? Because it's the only one where the seller can choose to hire as many firms as they would like. That gets, would you imagine that gets really murky real fast?
Uh-huh.
Right? Because how many of them do they want to pay?
I'd be annoyed.
They only want to pay one, but they've hired a bunch. So it becomes really important with an open listing to determine, where did this buyer come from? Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
When a buyer shows up, if you got 12 firms, they're all going to claim what?
It's my buyer.
That's my buyer. That's my buyer. That's my buyer. And that's why open listings can become such a mess. And that's why this is what the picture looks like with an open listing agreement. The only way you can get paid is if you prove that your firm produced that buyer. If some other firm proves that they produced a buyer, are we going to get paid?
No.
No. If the seller shows that they brought the buyer, is the listing firm going to get paid?
No.
No. The only way a listing firm can get paid if they have an open listing agreement, the only way they can get paid is if they show that they produced the buyer.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe in that yard.
That's it. So again, this is not exactly the one you want if you're the listing firm. So if you had to rank them from the perspective of the listing firm, which one would you far and away prefer?
Exclusive right to
sell. Exclusive right to sell. If you absolutely couldn't get that one, what one might you consider taking?
Exclusive agency.
Exclusive agency. What one would you have to be almost nuts to want to deal with?
Open.
The open listing. The open listing. Okay. Everybody all right there? Those are the three, and they're going to ask you to differentiate those on the test. How would you get a test question about this one? This one would be a dead giveaway. You know, Lou is marketing a property in Garner, North Carolina, in which she has signed listing agreements with HPW, Keller Williams and EXP all at the same time. This is an example of what?
Open
That's
listing.
an open listing. That one's easy to spot.
And they all represent the seller.
They all represent the seller, but they're all competing against each other to try to produce a buyer. They might be all doing an open house at one time. They might all be doing an open house on the same day, but like the EXP's got their open house from 11 to 2, and HPW's got theirs from 2 to 3:30, and and Keller Williams has got theirs from 3:30 to 5. And if the buyer's there at 3:30, they're trying to fight over who produced them. A mess is what that is. A mess.
Would you say listing for the seller?
I'm sorry?
Would you say this is the best way, this is the best kind of listing for the seller?
I mean, I think in some ways it could be potentially, because it would really have the firms trying to compete against each other in a way. But at the same time, I also think it would be super confusing for the seller to deal with the arguments that were inevitable to come from this about who produced that buyer. You know, like, I mean, because here's what would happen. You know, EXP would say, that's my buyer. They came during my open house. But HPW would be like, but they saw my sign because our sign is bigger. And that's how they knew the open house was there. And I mean, it would just be this endless grudge match of who actually produced the buyer. So
what firms do this? I mean,
none that I'm aware of.
Okay. I've never seen it.
Now, you do see this in some other states, some other foreign market. California has quite a few open listings.
Okay.
Quite a few, especially those big. How many of y'all like to watch some of that nonsense like Selling Sunset and all that stuff like that? You know, those big 40, 50, 60 million dollar properties out there.
$1 million listing.
A lot of those sellers don't like to commit to one firm. A lot of those sellers will just go out and they'll hire every firm on the street and they'll say, here's the deal. You bring me a buyer, I'll pay you a commission. So some of those big mega listings like that might have 6 or 7 different firms representing it. Those are open listings.
That's probably not give you much incentive to market or advertise because you're not going to invest money.
Well, it gives you an incentive to do huge marketing for your events. Like you might do an open house that's like a movie premiere. You might have like lights flashing and because the only way you can get paid is if they come to your open house, right? They got to come when you're there. So it gives you a bunch of incentive to market it like crazy for your events, but no incentive to market it like on the MLS because that would be for somebody else to go show it and you can't make any money if they do that. So it's a very different way of marketing the property.
Travis, would you say that this open listing works best for those like multi-million-dollar homes just because there's so few buyers out there?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's so few buyers, and so it's much easier to determine who brought the buyer, right? In a regular residential listing, it becomes very hard to tell where the buyer actually came from. You know, like, because like Cherry was saying, well, did they, I mean, I know they showed up at the open house, but maybe they found it online. Did they find it in the MLS? Did they see the sign? How did they actually figure out the property was for sale? It's very hard to determine. Yeah. So it's very impractical, very impractical. And by the way, that Selling Sunset, those are some mean women there. Good.
I finished that last night.
I haven't seen it yet.
I watched that thing and well, first of all, I watched the first episode and I thought the buyer was going to sexually molest the agent in episode number 1. Like, I mean, listen, maybe it's just me and my figure is not what buyers are looking for, but I never had a buyer telling me that they were envisioning me in the pool. I was on the show. That does not happen in the real world. If that happens, that's not a buyer. That's a Lester the molester. Call 911. Okay, that's not a good thing. That's how you know it's fake right from the beginning. But man, there's some. I guess if you want to watch it as like a soap opera, I did watch it some because somebody said, "Oh, this is a good example of dual agency," and I watched one scene. I was like, "That is not a good example of dual agency." I watched and they had a negotiation going on where they were the listing firm and they had a buyer client. And the two agents are sitting there on the sofa with each other while they're discussing with both of their clients.
Yeah.
And they're going back and forth they're going to the buyer client and going, well, can you come up a little bit? Because I think you really need to come up a little bit. No, that's not how dual agency works. And then they call the seller back and go, well, can you come down? Because if you come down, I think we could get the buyer to come up. Stop it. I want to go through the screen and slap all of them. That's not how this is supposed to work. But it's television, so.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is interesting, I'm sure. Just please don't tell me any of y'all are Christine in real life.
Till they down, right?
Oh my goodness. All right. I think that's probably a good place for us to take a lunch break. What do y'all think about that?
Let's do that.
Starving.
All right. So it is, I got 12:50. So 1:35, just say 1:40. 1:40.
Okay.
Okay.
Guys, enjoy.
Me too.
Yeah, 1:40. So before lunch, we were, we already talked about, as a matter of fact, these next couple slides are going to go very quickly because we kind of already did this. When I put on the screen for you earlier, that listing agreement, the one that we went through and showed you kind of like where it says, if a ready, willing, and able buyer is produced. And that was the exclusive right to sell listing agreement that comes from North Carolina Association of Realtors. The big thing to remember about that form, like every other form that we show you in this class, is that it's not created by the Real Estate Commission. They will try to trip you up with test questions just for something as simple as that. They'll give you some answer choice like, it must be on the form approved by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Does the Real Estate Commission have anything to do with any kind of contract forms, agency agreements, listing agreements, buyer agency, any of that?
No.
No, they do not. They don't do that. That's the North Carolina Association of Realtors. So that form comes from NC Realtors, and it can only be used by people who are members of NC Realtors. So if you choose to not be a realtor, you can't use their forms either. You're not allowed to use their contracts, their forms, if you're not a member of them. I'm not going to talk about anything on this slide. You don't need to worry about this because we already talked about it when we went over it, when we looked at it earlier. They no longer test you on the extender clause. Don't worry about that. Some things, though, that we do need to address about any listing agreement, and this one includes it. Make sure we list all the sellers. I mean, if it's a married couple that owns the property, how many of them need to sign the listing agreement to hire the listing firm?
Both.
Both, exactly. If it's 4 siblings who inherited a property and they're all married, how many people do we need to sign that listing agreement?
8 of them.
8.
All 8 of them, Luigi, I think you had up 9 fingers, but we'll count that. I'm gonna give you benefit of the doubt there.
I did that.
Okay, that was 8. Okay, it looked like she had 9 up. I was like, well, that's all right. It's close enough. It has to have an expiration date. It can't be open-ended. Remember, that's true of any agency agreement. And the most common way we charge commission is percentage of sales price. But did we say there were other ways? Could we charge a flat fee, for example?
Yes.
Yes. Now, one thing I want to point out, sometimes out in the real world, there are firms who will charge a flat fee and give what they call a limited services listing. And that's okay. The Real Estate Commission doesn't care what you charge, how you charge it, what services you offer, except they do require you to offer what they call minimum services. Minimum services just mean you have to follow the law. So like here's what I mean by that. And this is practical. We talked about disclosing material facts last week. And we said it was going to be probably whose responsibility to disclose, to make sure that the property has been checked for signs of problems so those can be disclosed. Who do we say that responsibility would probably fall back to?
The sub-agent.
Broker.
The listing agent, the listing broker, right, would probably have to do that. If your business model as a firm is, okay, we just charge you $500 and we put it in the MLS for you, but we don't do anything else, does that remove you from the responsibility of having to disclose material facts, or is that still your job?
It's still your job.
It's still your job. There are certain things that, because they're the law, you can't negotiate away. Does that make sense for everybody? You don't get relieved of legal responsibilities just because you have like a lower fee business model. So I want to make sure and point that out to you. We talked about how there had to be a non-discrimination statement and that you have to sign it on behalf of your firm. Now, I'm going to stop the video here and start a new one.